What power must a man hold to command those who once defied the heavens? There are stories so heavy they cannot be told in the light. They are spoken when the stars are watching and the sand no longer moves, when the night stretches wide and time forgets to pass. Stories like this do not begin. They are already waiting behind the veil of your eyelids, in the silence before your first breath, in the forgotten names whispered by winds that cross deserts no map dares name. This is the story of a man who knelt only to the One, a prophet whose voice did not rise in anger but in command so holy even the jinn fell silent. It is said his ring bore the name of God, that it gleamed with a seal etched not by man but by angels forged from heaven's fire and earth's dust. They called it the Ring of Solomon, but it was no mere ornament. It was a covenant, a throne in miniature. With it the king of the wind could bind the necks of demons and make spirits build temples by moonlight. But such power is never held without price. If you are still here, then perhaps this tale was always written for you. Tell me softly, from where beneath the sky do you listen tonight? And if the hush within you feels ready, leave a trace, a light, a whisper. Press like, press subscribe, so the next forgotten scroll may find its way to you. Now close your eyes and listen as the scroll unrolls. As you listen, may your heart grow still. The story begins now before the gold, before the throne, before the ring that turned shadows into servants. There was only a boy with quiet eyes that studied the earth as though it spoke to him, and a silence in his chest that echoed louder than thunder. He did not laugh like other children, nor did he chase the sun across the fields like his brothers. Instead, he listened to the birds at dusk, to the stones beneath his feet, to the wind that carried the names of the old prophets through the almond trees. He was the son of a king, yes, but even kings cannot shape the soul of a child. That is the work of the heavens, and from the moment he first breathed, the heavens were watching. His name was Sulayman, and though the people called him prince, the stars already called him Hakim, the one who would be given wisdom beyond years, beyond time, beyond blood. It is said that when he was still a boy, he wandered into the hills alone for many days, and when they found him, his mouth was dry from silence and his eyes were wet with knowing, for he had spoken to something in the wind, and the wind had answered, but they did not believe him, not yet. Not even his father, Dawud, whose voice turned iron into praise and psalms into prophecy, could see the fullness of the fire hidden beneath his son's stillness. Yet the jinn could see it, even then, and they trembled. For it is written, when a soul is chosen to carry the seal of the unseen, the earth itself will hold its breath. Shadows gather, spirits murmur. The ground cracks not from weight but from waiting. The heavens prepare the ink, the angels prepare the flame, and time begins to fold in anticipation. Solomon was not yet a prophet, not yet a king, but already strange things happened when he prayed. One evening, long before the ring, he sat alone by a river. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the reeds around him sang soft lullabies to the night. But Solomon did not sleep. He whispered a prayer, not loud, not learned, but raw, something he carried from the marrow of his bones, a yearning not for power, nor gold, nor armies, but for closeness to the one who hears all things. And the river stilled, the wind vanished, the trees ceased their weeping, and for the first time the air grew heavy with presence. He did not see the face. No eye sees the face of the unseen and lives unchanged, but he felt the silence shift, felt the weight of eternity press upon the skin of the moment. And then he heard it, a name not made of letters but of light, not shouted, not spoken, given, placed gently into the center of his soul like fire into dry wood. It did not burn, but it changed everything. That night Solomon returned home, his steps lighter than air, his silence deeper than sleep. And though no one knew why, even the animals turned to look when he passed. They would not understand, not yet, but the watchers of the unseen did. In the unseen realm they whispered among themselves. The boy has been touched, one said. Not touched, said another, claimed. He has not called upon us yet. He will. And so they waited, but not all were pleased. Among the spirits and jinn, there are those who bow to the Most High, creatures made of smokeless flame who remember the command at the beginning of time. And there are those who still carry the curse of defiance, who followed the first to fall, who roam the edges of men's minds and wait for invitations born of arrogance and hunger. They saw the boy. They saw what was being prepared, and they ted him for it. For it was known that from the line of Dawud would come a ruler whose seal would bind even the wildest of them, whose voice would chain them to stone and silence their curses. And so they began to whisper in the dreams of the weak. But dreams do not move the will of the heavens. The fire had already been lit. In the days that followed, Solomon began to see beyond veils. When he closed his eyes in prayer, he saw cities made of breath, towers built from wind, oceans that held memories instead of salt. He knew things no teacher had told him, understood patterns in birdsong, meaning in the swaying of trees, sorrow in the face of a dying animal. He was still a boy, but something ancient moved through him, something older than the mountains that fed the rivers. And then came the night of the vision. He was sleeping, or so they thought. But inside the stillness of his chest, the sky split open. A light descended not with fire, but with memory. A scroll was handed to him, not written in ink, but in obedience. And beside it a ring, simple, circular, a stone set in gold, upon it a seal no hand had carved. He reached to touch it, but just as his fingers brushed the metal, a voice thundered, not aloud, but within every particle of his being. Not yet. And he awoke, breathless. Years would pass before he saw the ring again. But from that night the spirits followed him, not to attack, not yet, but to watch, to learn the patterns of his soul, to find cracks in the stone of his heart. They would find none, for the boy had been chosen, and the seal had been shown, but power must wait for obedience. And before the hand wears the ring, the soul must kneel. There are gates not built by hands, not of wood, not of iron, but of silence, thin veils between what is seen and what is not. They stand at the edges of breath, at the curve where dream and waking brush against one another. Few ever find them. Fewer still are allowed to pass. But Solomon was born at the threshold. Even as a boy, he walked the borderlands between this world and the one behind it. And though he did not yet command the jinn, he could feel them, not like a man feels wind or stone, but the way the soul feels memory it cannot explain. A pressure, a watching, a weight in the corner of prayer. The spirits knew him, and they waited. They did not dare approach without permission. For even among the jinn, the ones who flared with fire and pride, there were ancient laws written before the stars, laws that bound their kind to the decrees of the Most High. And they had heard the decree, "This child is marked," but they did not know why or what he would become. So they watched, some in awe, some in fear. And some, the ones who still burned from the rebellion of Iblis, in rage that had waited millennia for a name to hate again. One such spirit was hidden in the palm of a cedar tree. His name, long lost to human tongues, was once spoken in the courts of angels before he chose defiance. A jinn of old, his fire had once bowed in the presence of the first man, but now he burned with resentment. He watched the boy Solomon pray, saw how the wind responded, how animals quieted when he passed, how the earth itself bent toward his voice. And the jinn whispered to the shadows, "If he is given the seal, we will all fall." But not all jinn were wicked. Some, created from the same smokeless fire, still remembered their first prostration, still trembled at the name of God. These came near in reverence, unseen to men, but drawn like moths to the quiet light in Solomon's soul. They whispered blessings in the dark, circled him in sleep, and kept the lesser demons at bay. It was from them that Solomon first heard the name of the ring, not in a dream, not in a voice, but in the hush between verses, the sacred space between a whisper and a breath. "There is a ring," the wind seemed to murmur, "forged before time, bearing the name that breaks all chains. The one who wears it will command not by power, but by purity." He did not yet know what it meant. But something inside him wept when he heard it. Years passed. The boy became a man, and Solomon began to speak less and listen more. He sat beneath olive trees for hours, unmoving, not in sloth but in presence, as though every moment was a scroll waiting to be read without eyes. When he spoke, his words carried strange weight, not because of volume, but because they echoed beyond the air. People began to seek him for counsel. They brought disputes, questions, fears, and his answers were not clever. They were true. It was said that truth followed him like a scent, that lies withered in his presence, and deception felt ashamed to speak. And the spirits still waited. One evening, Solomon stood at the edge of a ruined well. The sky above him was full of stars that did not move. He closed his eyes and spoke a single sentence. "O Lord of the hidden and the seen, if you have chosen me, then teach me the name that commands not by force but by your permission." The wind did not answer, the stars did not flicker, but beneath the well, far beneath, something stirred. A rusted seal, long buried beneath sand and stone, trembled in the darkness, and in the realm beyond time the angels turned their gaze. That night the dreams of Jinn twisted. A darkness, long shackled, began to tremble against its chains. The cursed ones who had built temples of flame in defiance of heaven felt the pull of an ancient vow reawaken. They remembered the seal and the command it carried. They remembered the voice of the prophet who would wield it, a voice not of cruelty but of obedience, a voice they could not resist, and they feared. In a cave not far from the city, one such spirit tore its own wings in agony. It had once been a prince among the jinn, a teacher of forbidden things, a whisperer in the ears of kings. Now it saw its end in the shadow of a man not yet crowned. It howled into the wind, "Why him? Why must our chains return? Why must our freedom be bought with his breath?" But no answer came, only the silence of a decree already written. The gate had begun to open, and Solomon, unaware of the war raging in the unseen, rose from prayer with a heart full of peace. He did not seek power, he sought rightness. He did not crave command, he craved justice. It was this that made him worthy. And it was this that terrified the jinn. In the early morning, just before the first call to prayer, Solomon dreamt again. He saw a garden of stone, a ring of fire, a throne built not on gold but on light, and a voice older than creation spoke without sound. "You will be given a ring, but not to possess, to carry. You will be given command, but not to rule, to restore. And all that defies you will bow not to you, but to the name etched upon your hand." He awoke trembling. Gate was now half open, and the spirits gathered, some to serve, some to resist, but none could flee what had been written in the stars before the stars had names. It did not fall from the sky. It did not descend with flames, nor arrive upon chariots of gold. The ring that would shake the jinn and call demons by their forgotten names came as all true power comes, in stillness that breaks the soul before it breaks the world. And yet the heavens did not stay silent. They only waited for the man to kneel. Solomon was now a prophet, crowned, cloaked, beloved among his people and feared by those who worshipped the lie of dominion. The day he was named king, the stars were visible even at noon. Clouds curled into the shape of wings and birds flew in spirals above his head. The wind stilled not in submission but in reverence. But Solomon wept, for he knew the crown meant chains. He did not ask to command armies. He asked to understand. He did not ask to be raised above men. He asked to bow without pride. And it is said that the Most High heard him. That very night the sky trembled, but only he could hear it. He rose from his prayer mat as if drawn by some call in the earth. Not a sound, not a word, just the pulse of divine will beating softly beneath his feet. He walked through the garden, past his guards, past the walls of the palace, past the sleeping deer in the courtyard, past the olive trees that bent gently as he passed. He walked until he reached the place of silence, the mountain that no one else dared climb. There he waited, and the earth did not speak, but the air grew thick, so thick it held his breath. He closed his eyes, laid his hands upon the stone, and whispered the only name that mattered. Ya Allah, the heavens split, but not with light, with silence so loud it silenced all things. Not a bird moved, not a breeze stirred. Even the jinn who circled the outer realms gasped, for they too heard it. A soundless command, a divine decree carried not by trumpet but by truth. And then the thunder, not from the clouds but from beneath. The earth shuddered not in rebellion but in obedience. The very stone he touched cracked with a sound like breaking eternity, and from it rose not fire but a simple ring, carved with a seal no eye could read, yet every soul could feel. The name upon it was not in letters but in light. It hovered, trembling, awaiting only one hand. Solomon reached for it with fear, not hunger, and the moment his fingers closed around it, the thunder ceased. The winds fell flat, the trees bowed, and the jinn screamed. All across the realms of the unseen, spirits fell to their knees. Chains unseen began to rattle. Names that had hidden for centuries were pulled from shadow into light. Demons who had corrupted kings, possessed temples, and twisted the hearts of men now found their breath caught not by the man, but by the name on the ring. Solomon did not smile, he wept again, for he felt the weight of what he now carried. It was not a ring, it was judgment, it was mercy, it was the divine will written in gold and bound to his hand, and the world would never be the same. In the days that followed, Solomon tested nothing. He waited, he prayed, and the ring burned, not with heat but with certainty. It glowed only when the will of God was near, and it dimmed when pride approached the edge of his heart. It was not a tool, it was a trust, and Solomon wore it not with pride but with trembling. The first jinn came to him in chains, a creature with wings torn by his own sin, eyes blackened by centuries of cursing the name of truth. It was said that he had once been mighty, one of the whisperers in the court of Pharaoh. Now he stood before the prophet, shackled not by iron, but by the unseen decree written in the sky the day Solomon was born. The king did not speak first. The jinn did. "Will you destroy me, son of Dawood?" Solomon looked at the creature, this fire-wrought being who had led nations astray, who had laughed at prophets and poisoned wells of wisdom. And he said only, "I do not command, I only carry." He raised the ring, and the jinn fell, not in agony but in surrender. He bowed his head and whispered the name he had cursed for 1,000 years. And so it began. One by one the spirits came, not because they were summoned, but because the seal called them by the names they had long buried, names written before their rebellion, names only God remembered. Some came to serve, some came to resist and were broken by obedience. Others fled to corners of the earth, hiding in caves, in salt, in fire, hoping the ring would never find them. But the seal did not need to seek, it simply was, and its presence reshaped the world. Birds spoke to the prophet. Winds carried messages no man had written. Ants begged for mercy and were heard. Demons were made to build. Jinn constructed temples not for themselves but for worship. Spirits carved glass into crystal, water into music, stone into memory. The world began to reflect the will it had once forgotten. But Solomon did not lose himself. He wore the ring like a weight, not a weapon, and in the quiet of the night, when even spirits slept, he would remove it, place it beside him, and pray, "O Allah, do not let me forget who I was before the thunder." The ring never answered, but it burned softly, as if remembering, and so the seal had returned, not as legend, but as light. And Solomon, the prophet, the king, the man who had once wept by a river, now stood between the jinn and the throne, holding a ring that did not belong to him, but to the one who sees all things. Not all jinn were chained, not all came by force. Some were born before the mountains and remembered the first light that struck the darkness. They remembered the command, bow. They remembered refusing, but not all. A few had bowed. And those who bowed had wandered in silence, waiting for the one whose voice would not command them by cruelty, but call them by name. He was here now, and his voice carried something they had not felt since the first morning, the permission to obey without shame. There was one among them, the oldest of his kind. His name, when spoken in the jinn tongue, sounded like wind scraping fire. But Solomon, peace be upon him, called him gently Ifrit, not in mockery, not in fear, in recognition. Ifrit had watched empires fall. He had seen the sons of Adam rise and fall like grains in a desert wind. He had been summoned by sorcerers, bound by false names, forced to speak lies. But now the seal had returned. The ring glowed with a script no sorcerer could forge, no spell could counterfeit, and the Ifrit bowed, not because he was broken, because he remembered the voice behind all voices. Solomon did not shout. He simply turned his face to the unseen wind and whispered, "Come." And the Ifrit came, with fire circling his limbs and smoke dancing around his face like forgotten prayer. He lowered his head before the prophet, and in a voice like thunder echoing through caves, he said, "Command me, O bearer of the seal." But Solomon did not ask for armies. He asked for silence, for flight, for a messenger who could ride the winds where no man had ever walked, past mountains veiled in cloud, into the unseen world where jinns still lingered in shadows. He asked for the Ifrit to carry words not of power but of invitation. "Tell them," he said, "that I do not come to break them, I come to restore what they forgot. Tell them I bring the seal and mercy walks beside it." The jinn's fire dimmed, his voice softened. "There are many who will not come, O king, many who curse your name in silence, many who hide in the fire, feeding on the fear of men, they will not bow." Solomon nodded. "Then remind them that the seal does not forget." The Ifrit rose, and the air shimmered. He leapt into the sky like flame given wings, and the wind itself parted for him. He flew across deserts, above oceans, through ruined temples where ancient jinn wept beneath curses they could no longer lift. He entered sea, caverns where demons drank poison in the dark and whispered the name they swore they'd never speak again, Sulayman. And with that name came dread. The wicked among them trembled, for they had heard the stories, how he spoke to animals, how the stars paused when he prayed, how the ring he wore bore the command of the one they had once defied. And the Ifrit declared, "You who hide in the ashes, your names have been remembered. You who whispered in the dreams of tyrants, your time is numbered. He who holds the seal walks with justice in his right hand and the breath of God in his left." Some fled deeper, some wept. Some spat curses into the dark and vowed to twist every man who ever bore a child of light, but others came. They arrived not by path, not by wind, but by permission, invisible to all but Solomon, and they bowed. Some were winged and burning, some crawled, broken by their own shame. Some were tall as trees, others flickered like candle smoke, but all of them listened. And when Solomon spoke, the winds themselves carried his voice. One day he stood atop a mountain where no man had stood before. The sky was open, clear, and infinite. He raised his hand. The ring shimmered and the air bent to his breath. "O wind," he said, "carry my words where walls cannot stand." And the wind obeyed. It lifted his voice and wrapped it in memory. It carried it to valleys where jinn had buried their ears. It echoed in ruins built before Adam was formed. It whispered into the shadows of palaces where magicians trembled. It flowed like a river of command, not of tyranny, but of knowing. And the jinn heard, not just his voice, but his truth, that he sought no worship, that he offered no trick, only the remembrance of what they were before they fell, and those who remembered wept. It was said that in that year 7,000 jinn entered obedience, not to Solomon, to the Most High, because of the voice that carried light in its syllables, because of the seal that glowed with a mercy they thought they had lost. And Solomon, he returned to his prayer mat. He did not boast of the Ifrit, he did not count the spirits. He placed the ring on the earth beside him and prostrated, and the ring glowed softly, not in power but in peace. The Ifrit returned, his fire calmer now, his wings not curled in arrogance but folded in devotion. And Solomon looked at him and said, "Will you carry my voice again?" And the jinn who once scorched the earth bowed his head and said, "Until my fire is ash, O bearer of the seal." It was in the far west of the known world, past the valleys where even the wind no longer speaks, that they built it. A temple without windows, a fortress without doors, walls of copper that bled green beneath the sun, sealed with words carved in tongues no man had written, no jinn had ever taught. Beneath that terrible dome, they worshipped not the Creator, but a shadow that mimicked him. a being of fire with no name, only a hunger. They called it Razar, the devourer of vows, the collector of sacred oaths. He had once been beautiful, once bowed, but now his wings were torn and his breath thick with the scent of rotted incense. In the age of lost prophets, he had tricked men into building temples in his name, whispering promises of power and knowledge. He taught them to burn their prayers in brass urns, to write names in reverse, to tie knots with human hair and bury them under thresholds. And in return, he gave them nothing but madness. Razar was chained now, his copper temple buried beneath the earth, his name struck from the tongues of the jinn who still feared God. But even in chains, his presence lingered like smoke in an empty house. Solomon had heard of him, not from the wind, but from a child, a boy who came barefoot to the palace gates, with dust in his eyelashes and blood on his hands. He said his father had opened a scroll he found buried near the mountains. That at night his father spoke in voices not his own. That shadows now moved without cause in their house. That his mother no longer recognized the names of her children. Solomon knelt, placed a hand on the boy's head, and the ring warmed, not with heat but with memory. The seal remembered, and the prophet knew. He sent no army, he went himself. The copper walls, half swallowed by sand and time, still pulsed with a breath not from this world. The air was thick, sick with forgotten incantations. Even the jinn who followed Solomon stepped back not from fear but from disgust. And yet the ring did not dim, it glowed brighter. Solomon placed his palm against the temple wall, and the copper cried out. It moaned like a wounded beast, shuddered like a grave disturbed. And then from within came the voice, ancient, bitter, splintered with hate. You come to bind me again, son of the king. Solomon did not answer with pride. He answered with silence. The ring answered for him. The seal burst forth with light, not a blinding light, but a sacred clarity that peeled away illusion. The walls became as paper. The shadows writhed and scattered like ants beneath water. And there he stood, Razar, bound by chains not made by hands, chains of decree. His body no longer flame, but ash held together by defiance. He laughed. You think obedience is power, prophet? I was born of obedience. I bled it from my bones until nothing remained. Solomon stepped forward. His voice was soft. Obedience does not make you weak, it makes you whole. Whole, Razar spat. I was whole before your kind was molded from dust. The prophet raised the ring. And Razar fell to his knees, not because of pain, because his chains remembered the seal. You are not here to speak, Solomon said. You are here to be named. The demon hissed, do not say it, but the ring burned. And Solomon whispered a name no tongue had spoken in 1,000 years, the true name of Razar, the name he had cast aside in the rebellion, the name written beside his prostration in the first age of flame. And at its sound Razar screamed, not in rage, but in mourning. For to be named again was to remember, to be remembered. The chains glowed. The copper walls melted like wax in a holy fire, and the temple was no more. Only Razar remained, broken, bowed, burned not by wrath but by remembrance. Solomon knelt beside him, placed a hand upon the ash-stained creature's head, and whispered, I do not come with punishment, I come with the seal. Return if you still remember how. Razar's lips trembled, and for the first time since the fall he cried. The people rebuilt the village in peace. The boy's father returned to his senses. The mother sang once more. And beneath the earth the echoes of the false temple faded like the last breath of a dream. But the seal, it glowed deeper now. As if with every name restored it became not heavier but holier. That night Solomon sat alone beneath a fig tree. The moonlight brushed his face like a mother's hand. He looked at the ring. It pulsed softly. He whispered, Ya Allah. If there are still more who wear their chains like crowns, send them to me. And the wind answered, not with sound but with movement. Far to the east a stone began to tremble, and a voice woke in the deep. Another spirit remembered its name, and the seal grew warm. There are names too heavy for the tongue, names that were never meant to be spoken aloud, not because they were forbidden but because they were forgotten. lost in the rebellion of flame, scattered like ash into the folds of time, burned into the memory of jinn who tremble still at the thought of being called. Solomon knew these names. He did not learn them from books. There were no scrolls inked with fire, no parchment that survived the storms of heaven's wrath. These names lived in the wind, in the murmurs of dying jinn, in the pause between two breaths during prayer. They were not spoken, they were revealed. And each time one was given to him, the ring grew heavier. It was said that the seal did not glow merely to impress or shine. It glowed when a name returned to the light. One night Solomon sat in the courtyard alone. The moonlight pooled around him like silver water. His servants had long since gone. The palace was asleep, but the air was not empty. The jinn were near. Some hovered like shadows behind trees. Others circled above like invisible birds of flame. And one knelt before him. She was unlike the others. Slender as smoke, tall as a minaret, her eyes dimmed by centuries of sorrow. Her name was Alathea, once a spirit of knowledge who had wandered too far into forbidden books, who had traded remembrance for curiosity and become tangled in the alphabet of lies. Now she came to him, not with defiance, with desperation. "Say it," she whispered. Her voice cracked like ice splitting in sunlight. "I can no longer carry it." Solomon did not look at her with wrath. He did not look at her with pity. He looked at her the way a prophet looks at a soul once whole with grief and with hope. "Are you ready to remember?" he asked. She nodded, and the ring began to glow. The air shifted. The other jinn backed away, for they knew what was coming. The name. The one carved into her spirit the day she bowed to the Most High, the name erased from her by 1,000 whispered lies, by the pages of books that bled smoke and shadow. Solomon did not speak it aloud. He breathed it, and in that breath, the sky rippled. Alathea collapsed. She wept without sound, and her fire changed, no longer wild, no longer dark, but soft like the flicker of an oil lamp in prayer. She had been named, and she remembered. Solomon raised the ring. Its light wrapped around her like a shawl made of silk and fire, and with it the alphabet of the jinn, once secret, once sacred, was lifted from the ash and returned to the light. It is said the seal held not just power but language, not the language of men, but the primal language. The breath that spoke mountains into form, the syllables that tamed wind and stone. Solomon was given 37 names, names carved into smoke, names that could summon, bind, or release, but he did not use them for games. He did not recite them to impress. He spoke only when commanded and only with intention. Each name was a burden. Each name was a mirror. For every jinn summoned had once been a servant of light, and each fall was a story of forgetting. One day a traveler came to his court, trembling, eyes hollow, voice lost to fear. He claimed that in the southern lands children had gone missing, vanished into air, that the wind in their village sang at night, but not with music, with voices that didn't belong. Solomon stood. The ring turned cold. This was not a jinn. It was a demon, and its name was one of the 7 lost to time. He prayed for 3 days, fasted. And on the 3rd night he saw it in a vision, a symbol written not in ink but in wind and ash, flickering above a cave buried in thorns. He awoke in sweat, whispered the name, and the mountain split, not in violence, in relief, for the land itself had grown tired of housing such darkness. The cave opened, and inside the demon waited, bound not by chains but by shame. It hissed, "You should not know my name." Solomon replied, "Then you should not have thrown it away." The seal burned with memory. And the jinn outside the cave turned their eyes away, for they could not bear to witness the moment one of their own was unmade by truth. The demon tried to run, but names cannot run. They follow. They drag the soul behind them like a shadow begging for light. And when the ring was raised, the demon collapsed into wind. No scream, just silence. And in that silence, Solomon whispered, "May you return before the day. May your name be written again in light." Then he turned, and the seal dimmed once more. In the years to come, many such names would return. Each one Solomon carried like a weight around his heart, not because he loved command, but because he understood responsibility. To speak a name is to see a soul. To see a soul is to remember who they were before the fall. And the ring did not forget. That night the wind carried his voice to the jinn again, and they whispered, "He remembers our names, even the ones we try to forget." It began not with tools, not with stone, but with silence. A silence so vast that even the jinn paused in their flight. A silence not of absence, but of awe, the kind that falls when the earth senses it will be touched by remembrance. Solomon stood at the edge of the high hill where the wind braided through olive trees and the soil carried the scent of centuries. His eyes were closed, his palms open to the sky. Around him no walls, no throne, no guards, only air and dust and memory. "Not for me," he whispered. "Let it rise for him." The jinn were waiting. Spirits of fire, newly bound by obedience, hovered above the ground. They had once built palaces for tyrants, carved caves for whisperers, raised towers where dark blood ran through the mortar. But never had they built for the Most High, and they trembled. For what stone could hold his name? What shape could house the breath of the one who shaped the stars? Solomon opened his eyes, and the ring began to glow. He did not raise his voice. He simply touched the earth, and at that touch the ground sighed, as if at long last it had been remembered. He chose no marble, no gold. He chose silence and wind and stone from the belly of the earth. Stones untouched by idolatry, unshaped by pride. Stones that had waited patiently beneath centuries of dust, waiting for this command. The jinn began to move, not in haste but with reverence. They did not fly, they walked. Their fire dimmed to soft glow, and one by one they placed their hands upon the ground and listened. They listened to where the roots hummed with prayer, to where the earth remembered prophets who had passed long before, to where the soil had once kissed the feet of Abraham. Here, they said, here is where it must begin. And so the first stone was laid, not with a shout, but with a verse. Solomon recited it softly, the air holding its breath to catch each syllable. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, the stone glowed, not with magic, with obedience. And the jinn wept. For in all their years, in all their might, they had never felt purpose like this. To build a place not of pride, not of illusion, but of remembrance. They worked by night. They sang no songs. Their tools were wind and will. They shaped the walls with fire, melted stone into obedience, lifted beams with whispers of the name. Even the birds circled above them in reverent silence, and the trees around bent slightly inward, as if bowing to what would soon rise. And Solomon, he watched, not as a king, but as a servant. Each night he would walk through the foundation barefoot, reciting prayers into the unfinished air so that every wall would know it was built by breath before brick. It is said that he would pause beside each stone and ask, "Do you remember him?" And the stone would warm in reply, for even stone longs to be touched by the command of the One. As the foundation grew, the jinn began to change, not just in shape, in soul. The ones who had once torn through cities now laid floors with trembling hands. The ones who had once whispered into the minds of pharaohs now waited silently for Solomon's next word. One among them, a massive spirit of smoke and flame who had once claimed to possess the power to shake mountains, was now silent as ash, shaping the corner pillars of the temple with a gentleness that made the other jinn weep. "Why do you work so softly?" Another jinn asked him. The Great One paused and answered, "Because now I know who the stones belong to." The temple rose, but no idol stood within it. No image, no statue, no crown, only light and space and wind. It was not a place to look upon God. It was a place to remember that he cannot be looked upon. A place where knees found the ground again, where fire bent willingly to dust, where voices once cursed now echoed only with praise. Solomon prayed within it before the roof was finished, and the jinn gathered at the edges, not daring to step inside. He called to them, "This place is not for me. It is for all who remember." And one by one they entered, their fire dimmed, their pride uncoiled, and beneath that open sky they prostrated. It is said the stars dimmed so as not to outshine the prayer of Jinn who had once defied the heavens, now bowed in silence upon the stone. Solomon did not watch, he wept, not out of sadness, but because this was what the ring was for, not command, not fear, but restoration. And the wind passed through the temple like a breath held for centuries. Now finally released, they had never built with reverence before. In all the ages since their birth in flame, the Jinn had carved wonders, towers that touched stars, palaces lit by the bones of suns, hidden cities beneath shifting dunes where glass flowed like water and shadows were shaped into doors. But never for remembrance, never for the Most High. This temple, it was different. It asked not for grandeur, it asked for surrender. And so the tools they had used for centuries, molten claws, searing breath, invisible blades of smokeless fire, trembled in their hands, unsure if they were worthy. Many Jinn laid their tools aside, working with bare limbs and whispered prayer. But one tool remained, a blade, made not by men or spirit, made by command. Its name was Nar al-Mutlaq, the fire that cuts without burning. It had been forged at the beginning when the Jinn first bowed. Shaped from the breath of the east wind and the silence between two verses of divine speech. It was said to be hidden in the realm between light and shadow where no pride could reach. No Jinn had dared touch it, until now. One among them, a spirit named Jaziel, was tasked with carving the altar stone. Not a throne, not a pedestal, but the center of the temple, a place where prostration would begin. The place where the first prayer would rise and the last breath of every seeker would return. Stone was ancient, brought by wind across 7 lands. It could not be broken by hand. It could not be shaped by ordinary fire. And so Solomon called for the blade, not aloud, with the seal. He raised the ring to the sky, and the sky answered. A line of white fire descended, quiet as dew, sharp as truth. It did not crackle or roar. It sang, a single note only those who remembered heaven could hear. The note made birds still mid-flight, made Jinn fall silent mid-whisper. Solomon stepped back. And Jaziel approached. He was not a prince among the Jinn, not a warrior, not even a builder. He had been silent for centuries. He had once guarded a cave where a forgotten prophet slept. He had once wept when Iblis refused to bow. He had never taken a master until the seal called him. Jaziel reached for the fire, and it did not burn. It wrapped around his wrist like silk woven from dawnlight. His eyes glowed with remembrance, not of who he was, but of what he was made for. He bowed his head and placed the blade upon the altar stone. It hummed. The stone responded, not with resistance, but with relief. And slowly, with movements gentle and slow, Jaziel began to carve. Each stroke left no scorch, only a glow. And as the shape emerged, so too did sound, soft, sacred sound that did not enter the ears but the soul. The other Jinn watched. Even Solomon watched in silence. And when it was done, the altar did not shine. It breathed. The very stone exhaled as if life had been placed inside it by the act of obedience itself. And Jaziel, he fell to his knees. The blade had taken something from him. Not life, not limb, but flame. His fire dimmed, not out of punishment, out of offering. He looked up at Solomon with tears made of smoke and said, "It was never mine." Solomon knelt and placed the ring upon the altar for one night only, so that the seal too would bow not to the stone but to the one for whom it was shaped. That night the temple did not sleep. Even in silence it hummed. The walls vibrated with names not spoken aloud. The floor pulsed with the weight of footsteps yet to come. Jinn walked its perimeter in prayer. Birds gathered on its unfinished beams facing the east. The stars stood still, and the fire, the sacred fire, hovered above the altar like a forgotten angel watching, waiting for the first prayer. Solomon remained in sajda until the sun touched his back. He did not ask for visions. He did not ask for glory, only this: let what we build remember you when we forget. And from beneath the altar a breeze, cool, fragrant, and full of reply. Jaziel never returned to the skies. He remained near the temple, tending to the fire that no longer burned. And every time a stone shifted from age or wear, he was there. not with a blade, but with a prayer. And the seal, it glowed not in command, but in gratitude. There was no crown at its center, no gem, no gold, no seat to rest upon. When the temple was finished, the jinn stood back, breathless, if jinn could breathe. The birds stopped singing. The earth held itself in stillness, and even the trees bowed just slightly toward its heart. The wind did not pass through as before. It circled, as if reluctant to leave, as if waiting for permission. This temple, unlike all others, did not belong to time. It belonged to memory. Not a memory of men, but of the heavens, the memory of a world before idols, before pride, before voices rose to call themselves divine. A world where worship was a whisper and the soul bowed not for favor but from love. The structure stood complete, walls tall yet unadorned. Stone polished not with oil but with prayer. An open roof to the sky, for no ceiling dared come between the servant and the Lord of all. And in the very center, emptiness. Not a vacuum, not a void, a throne without a name. Solomon entered last. He walked barefoot. His cloak brushed the stones with a hush. His ring glowed not with fire but with remembrance. He did not look around. He did not marvel. He did not measure. He simply knelt. The jinn who had built it, hundreds of them, spirits of old, newly bound by light, watched in silence. Solomon pressed his forehead to the ground and spoke, not a speech, a prayer. "Ya Allah, this house is not for me. It is not for my name, nor my voice, nor my blood. It is for the one who has no likeness, no shape, no rival. It is for the light that split the dark, the mercy that outlives wrath, the truth that needs no throne yet fills all thrones." The altar pulsed. A breeze moved through the pillars, soft as the wings of an angel who does not wish to be seen, and Solomon stood. He turned to the gathered jinn, the birds, the silent watchers in the unseen, and said, "There will be no image. There will be no name carved in stone. There will be no idol, no statue, no symbol, for the one who owns all names cannot be caged by one." The jinn lowered their heads. Some wept, for they had built so many palaces for names that crumbled, so many thrones that demanded worship, so many chambers where kings sat like gods, but here there was only space, and that space was filled with the presence of the unseen. Solomon lifted the ring, and the seal flared, not with dominance, with clarity. In the light of that ring the temple shimmered as if every stone remembered its maker, as if the breath of the Most High passed gently between the columns. Then Solomon whispered a final command. "Leave it, not to the jinn, to the world, to kings who would come after, to rulers who would hunger for monuments and immortality. Do not touch it," he said. "Do not claim it, do not name it. Let it remain unnamed. Let it belong to the one who is above names." And with that he stepped down from the altar, no crown upon his head, no fanfare in his voice, only silence in his eyes. The jinn scattered, not in rebellion, in reverence. They returned to their realms, their fires softened, their hearts heavier. They carried with them not pride but peace, a peace they had never known in the service of tyrants. They had built a house, but what they truly built was surrender. The years passed, men came and went. Empires rose and crumbled like waves against forgotten shores, but the temple stood, unclaimed, untouched, unwritten. And though storms battered its pillars and winds sang of new gods and new names, the center remained hollow, perfect, sacred, for it had never been meant to be filled, only bowed toward, only faced in silence. Solomon never rested there. He never sat within its circle. He prayed at its edge, always with the ring turned inward, always as a servant, never as a king. And when he died, It is said his body remained standing in prayer beside one of its walls, that the jinn, too reverent to interrupt, continued working beside him for days, not knowing death had already kissed his shoulders. Only when the earth allowed a creature to gnaw through the staff that held his frame upright did he fall, and the jinn saw and wept, for even in death he had stood in worship, and even in the moment of falling he taught them something more. The seal was returned to the earth, buried where no one would find it, for the power was never the ring. It was the obedience behind it, and the temple still breathes today, not in stone, not in air, but in every heart that kneels without needing to know why, in every soul that builds something nameless for the one who needs no name. Before the first stone of the temple was laid, before the jinn bowed in light, before the ring glowed with the names of the forgotten, there was already a watcher, not in the sky, not in the fire, but beneath, in the hollow spaces of the earth where light has never reached, where no call to prayer echoes, where the bones of old lies rest in silence. He had no name, or if he did, it was swallowed long ago by his own hatred. Some said he was born of jinn, others said he was a remnant of something older, not fallen but refusing to rise. A shadow that had never bowed, not out of arrogance but out of hunger. He waited while Solomon built. He watched from far-off dunes while the wind carried prayers he could not stand to hear. He listened to the jinn speak of obedience, of peace, of the ring that bore the name that silences demons. And in his chest a fire burned, not the fire of jinn, a colder fire, a fire that consumes without warmth, the fire of envy. He had once been called Sakrath, but that name was lost, buried with the bones of the men who had once worshipped him, fooled by his false light. He had ruled for a short while in the days before Solomon's birth, when the seal had not been seen in the world for many centuries. He had whispered into the minds of kings, painted the sky with illusions, built temples where he drank incense like blood. But then came the prophet, and with him silence. The seal returned, and all the spirits who once bowed to Sakrath turned their faces away from him. Now he was alone, buried in a forgotten tomb deep beneath the desert sands, surrounded by the echoes of prayers he did not understand. But he waited and watched. He knew Solomon was righteous. He knew the prophet would not use the seal for pride. And so he also knew that one day the prophet would set it down. And when he did, Sakrath would take it, not for justice, not for command, but to undo the silence, to undo the names that had been remembered, to unseal the doors that the seal had closed. He waited through the rising of the temple. He waited through the building of cities and the spreading of peace. He waited while jinn came back to the light one by one. But when the whispers reached him that Solomon was growing older, he stirred, not in body, in will. He began to move through cracks in the dreams of weaker jinn. He called to those who still remembered rebellion with longing. He offered them things Solomon never would: revenge, freedom, fire without limits. Few listened, but one did. A small spirit, nameless and half-formed, who lingered at the edge of Solomon's court. One who swept the floors of the palace, listened to the prayers but did not pray, watched the seal with hungry eyes. Sakrath found him and offered a promise. "Bring it to me," he whispered, "and I will give you a throne of shadows." The spirit agreed, not out of hatred, out of hunger. The opportunity came quietly. On the day Solomon fasted in the mountains, he had placed the ring beside a spring, as he often did, so that he could wash before the next prayer. The ring never disappeared. It never moved. Even birds avoided it. The jinn knew better than to touch it, but the little spirit crept near. He whispered a lie into the wind that Solomon had given him permission. He wrapped his body in the scent of obedience. He approached the ring as if in prayer, and it did not resist, because the seal does not guard itself. It waits. It trusts the bearer. And in a breath it was gone. The spirit flew not high, not fast, but down, into the desert, to the place where Sakrath waited. And there beneath the sand the ring was delivered. Sakrath rose from his tomb. His eyes opened for the first time in centuries, and for a moment the wind paused. Even Solomon felt it, a shifting in the stillness. He reached for the ring and found only stone. And the air around him grew cold, not from fear, from grief. He stood, faced the horizon, and whispered only, "Ya Allah, let it return to you if it cannot remain with me." And far below, beneath the earth, Sakrath placed the ring on his finger, and the seal did not glow. It burned, not with warmth, with rejection. The name upon it did not bend to his will. It pierced him, and he screamed. A sound no world had heard. The ground shook, the skies darkened, and the jinn felt the cry beneath their feet. The seal had been touched by corruption, but it would not bow. In the temple the altar cracked slightly, not from damage, from grief. Solomon returned. He placed his palm on the stone, closed his eyes, and said, "The seal has not betrayed me, I have not betrayed it. Let it find its way back, or let its light rise in another." And the earth heard him, and the seal remembered. It was not a ring made of metal alone. It was a covenant, a whisper of the heavens bound in gold, etched not by tools but by a name that cannot be spoken without trembling. And Sakrath, who had waited centuries beneath the earth, now wore it like a crown. But the ring did not kneel to him. It writhed. It pulsed with a memory he could not command. The name upon it, that sacred, unspoken name of names, was not meant for him. It rejected his flame. It turned his will into ash. He raised his hand to summon spirits, and they did not come. He called to the winds, and they ignored him. He screamed into the dark, demanding obedience, and the shadows mocked him, because power without permission is no power at all. And the seal was forged only for hands that tremble when lifted, not fists, not claws, not arrogance cloaked in hunger. Sakrath tried to force it. He stood upon a blackened hill where forgotten jinn once bowed, and shouted ancient names that had not been spoken since the fall of Iblis. Names written backwards, names soaked in blood and sacrifice, names whispered by men who had burned their own children. Still, the seal did not glow. It dimmed. He grew desperate. He offered sacrifices, bones, fire, voices stolen from the dreams of men. The ring turned colder, not in temperature, in spirit, as if it were mourning, as if it were waiting. And the more Sakrath wore it, the weaker he became, not in body, in command. The spirits who once followed him began to drift. The jinn who feared him forgot him, and even the little servant who had stolen it from Solomon returned to the temple in silence and shame, kneeling for days at the edge of the foundation stone. Solomon did not banish him. He did not strike him. He simply said, "If you knew what you had taken, your hands would have burned away." And the spirit wept. But Sakrath, he would not let go. He buried the ring beneath his skin, thinking the seal would yield to his blood, but the ring knew. It burned a name into him, not the name of the Most High, but his own. Sakrath, etched in fire upon his bones, marked for all jinn to see. He had not gained power, he had been named. And naming is the beginning of judgment. He fled then, not for fear of Solomon, for fear of the ring. He hid in caves, in deserts, in places where wind had never passed. He carved barriers into stone, sealed himself behind layers of curses and shadow. But the seal was patient, and it began to speak, not aloud, not in sound, but in truth, the kind of truth that echoes in the corners of the soul when everything else has fallen silent. It reminded Sakrath who he had been. It reminded him of the first time he bowed, of the moment he had refused to prostrate to Adam, not out of ignorance but out of pride, of the long centuries in exile, of the voices he had corrupted, of the altars built in his name that even he could not look upon without flinching. And it asked the question again and again, "Do you remember?" He tried to silence it, but it echoed louder. He tried to remove the ring, but it clung to his skin like destiny. He tried to curse it, but every curse returned as light, cutting through his lies like blades of dawn. He was not wearing the seal, he was being witnessed by it. Far away, Solomon sat in his chamber. The ring was gone from his hand, but he did not mourn. He prayed, night after night, and in those prayers he whispered not for its return but for its protection. "Ya Allah," he said, "if it must be lost to me, let it never be lost to your will." And the angels heard, and the earth remembered, and deep in the cave where Sakrath writhed beneath the ring's silent gaze, a crack appeared in the stone. No jinn had touched it, no man had carved it, but the earth itself had had enough. The cave began to collapse, not in fury, in mercy. The light of the seal flared one final time, and Sakrath screamed, but not in pain, in regret, because for a moment, just a breath, he remembered, not his power, not his name, but the one he once bowed to. And in that breath the ring released him. It fell from his finger, landed gently on the stone, and disappeared. Solomon awoke before dawn, his heart heavy, his hands open. He walked to the temple barefoot. And there, upon the altar where once Jaziel had carved with fire, the ring lay waiting, unburnt, unbroken, unchanged. He wept and picked it up, and it glowed, not in fire but in recognition. He did not ask where it had gone. He did not ask what it had seen. He only said, "I will not remove you again." And the seal in its silence said, "Then I will not leave you." He did not raise his voice. He never had to. When Solomon stood once more with the seal upon his hand, the winds bowed again. The birds circled higher. The jinn who had trembled during its absence returned from the edges of the earth, drawn not by command but by relief. The prophet had not been broken. And the seal had come back, but not untouched. Something within it had changed. It burned brighter now, not with pride but with sorrow, as if it carried the memory of what had been done to it and what it had been forced to witness in silence. The whispers of Sakrath, the hunger in the dark, the cries of the weak who had nearly fallen again beneath false light. Solomon knew. He held the ring and bowed not in triumph but in grief. He went to the temple, entered alone, and knelt before the altar. The jinn did not follow him. Even the obedient stayed back. They had seen what the seal had endured. They had felt its echo in the folds of the air. Something sacred had been desecrated not by touch but by intention. And now judgment was near. Solomon remained in the temple for 7 nights. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He prayed, not for vengeance, for clarity. And on the 7th night, a wind entered that place like no wind before. It moved as if it had no source. It carried no sound, no scent, only weight. A sacred weight that pressed against the soul like the presence of truth too deep to bear. The prophet lifted his head, and the voice came, not from the air, from the seal, from the name written into it, not a name spoken, a name known. A voice that did not tremble because all things trembled at it. "He remembered me too late." That was all it said, and Solomon wept, because he understood. Sakrath, once mighty, once bowed, once burning with the breath of the Most High, had remembered in the final moment, just a flicker of repentance, a tear in the soul too late to stop the flood. The voice continued, "Mercy is for the willing, power is for the worthy." He was neither. And the ring grew cold again. Solomon left the temple and called for the jinn. Hundreds came. They stood in the desert night, stars overhead, waiting for his command. He did not shout. He simply said, "Let the name be writ." They knew what he meant. They had waited for it. In the sky, across the dark horizon, a glowing shape began to form, not from fire, not from cloud, but from will. A single word, Sakrath, not as a curse, as a warning for all jinn to see. So none would forget, not the theft, but the truth, that no hand can carry the seal unless it trembles, that no name survives if it seeks to use the sacred as a throne, and that the voice behind the ring does not sleep. Solomon raised the seal once more, and the jinn all bowed, even those who once followed Sakrath, even those who once mocked the prayers of the righteous, even those who had never seen the seal before but recognized the sound of truth when it passed through the air. The prophet did not curse them. He opened his hand and released them. "Go," he said. "Build nothing for me. Burn nothing for me. But remember the voice that lives within the seal. And do not forget the fire that refuses to obey false hands." They scattered into the wind, but the name in the sky remained for 7 nights, and even after it faded, its memory lived, in jinn tongues, in stories passed in smoke, in the way even the most rebellious among them would pause when they heard the name of Solomon, not from fear, from reverence, because he had not ruled them with chains. He had ruled with obedience, with a ring he never used to boast, and a voice that only spoke when silence had already said enough. And Sakrath, the earth sealed him away, not in fire, but in absence. No jinn speaks to him now. No shadow welcomes him. He is not in hell nor in heaven. He is forgot, and that is the deepest judgment of all. Solomon wore the ring until his death, but it never grew lighter, because those who carry truth carry its burden. And the seal, though it returned, never burned the same. It remembered, and in remembering it remained holy. It was not built in the likeness of earthly kings. No gold adorned its legs. no lions carved into its arms, no velvet laid upon its seat. The throne of Solomon, the one lifted by wind and built by the Jinn, was shaped not to impress the eyes of men, but to bow before the gaze of the one who sees all. They say the wood was taken from trees that grew on a mountain no man had climbed, that the Jinn who felled them did so only after praying for permission, that each plank was carried in silence by spirits who had once fled from light but now bore it upon their backs like a gift. There was no hammer, no nail, only the name, etched softly into each joint, not the name of Solomon, the name that Ed Solomon, the name written upon the ring. The throne bore no marking save that, and even that was hidden beneath the seat where no eyes could boast of having seen it. When it was completed, the Jinn stepped back, and the wind approached, not as a gust, not as a storm. It came as though summoned by memory, as if it had always known this moment would arrive. The wind circled the throne like a loyal companion who had waited for generations to be called. It wrapped itself beneath it, not lifting at first, but embracing, as if it asked without words, "Am I worthy?" And Solomon stood nearby, silent. He wore no crown, only the seal. He placed his hand gently upon the arm of the throne, and the ring glowed. The wind responded, and the throne rose, not in speed, not in spectacle, but like a breath held too long, finally exhaled. It floated above the ground, not high, not proud, just enough to show that obedience lifts what pride cannot. And the Jinn, gathered in rows, bowed, not to the throne, to the lesson, because they knew. They had built palaces for tyrants, carved cities for kings who declared themselves gods, but never before had they built a throne that hovered without arrogance, that moved without command, that sat beneath a man who never once asked to be carried. Solomon turned toward the east, and the wind obeyed. It lifted the throne gently, smoothly, without falter, without strain, as if it was not carrying weight but truth. Birds followed, the sky hushed. Even the clouds parted slightly as if to give room, and beneath him the earth watched. Children ran beneath the floating shadow with laughter. Old men wept, and the animals did not scatter, they gathered. Because all creation, deep in its bones, recognizes the one who rules without taking, who commands without breaking. It is said that as the throne moved across the lands, Solomon recited verses, not spells, verses, verses of protection, verses of remembrance, verses that kept the wind humble, the Jinn obedient, and his own soul anchored. Because to float above the earth is dangerous, not for the body, for the ego, and Solomon knew. The higher one rises, the more invisible pride becomes. So he chained his heart to the remembrance of Allah, and the throne did not drift, it glided. The people below began to call it the Arsh al-Ri, the throne of the wind. But Solomon never used the name, he called it nothing. Because only the one above thrones is worthy of titles. To him it was simply a place to sit while he worked, a vessel for duty, a seat to observe and serve. And in that humility the throne became something no kingdom had seen before, a sign, a verse, a moving ayah across the sky. Once, while crossing a desert where no caravan dared pass, Solomon saw a single woman kneeling in the sand. Her lips were cracked, her skin was burned. She was dying, but she was whispering a prayer. He descended. The wind obeyed, and the throne came to rest upon the ground beside her. She opened her eyes and wept, not from fear, from recognition. "You are the one who commands the wind," she said. And Solomon knelt beside her, cupped water to her lips, and replied, "No, I am the one who was commanded first." She lived, and told her children that the sky once came down, and it did not speak in thunder but in kindness. The throne remained. It was never kept behind palace gates, never guarded by soldiers, never polished by servants. It sat wherever Solomon sat, sometimes in the sky, sometimes on the earth, sometimes beside the sick, sometimes beneath the stars, always in remembrance, never in pride. And when he was alone and the wind gently rocked the throne like a cradle, he would whisper, "Ya Allah, do not let my soul rise higher than my sajda." And the wind would still. They saw it before they heard it, a shadow long and slow crawling across the sun. A a shape in the sky that did not belong to bird nor storm, too steady to be cloud, too soft to be chariot. Children pointed from rooftops. Elders squinted toward the horizon. Dogs stopped barking, trees stilled. And when the throne came near, the wind did not roar, it whispered. Through every alley and temple, through every courtyard and corridor, it whispered names not of men but of truths, mercy, justice, command without cruelty, light without blindness, power that bows first. These were the winds Solomon's throne carried. The cities it approached reacted like mirrors, reflecting the hearts that built them. Some bent, some broke. In the city of Ifra, where the queen had long ruled with wisdom and silence, the throne passed overhead like a low-floating moon. The people gathered in white. No horns were blown, no weapons drawn. The queen herself stood atop the palace walls and raised her arms to the sky. "Let the throne of the righteous pass above our roofs," she said, "for we have nothing to hide from the one who kneels before the one." Solomon's throne did not stop, but it glowed, a soft, sacred glow like sunlight remembered in the bones of the cold. And that night rain came to Ifra for the first time in 7 years. But in Zabir, a city carved in cruelty, where kings painted their faces in blood and fed pride like a pet lion, the throne brought something else. The ruler there, a man with gold sewn into his beard and a voice like broken stone, saw the shadow above and shouted to his armies, "Shoot it from the sky." They raised bows. The Jinn of Solomon watched in silence. Solomon did not move. He simply turned his head slightly, and the ring upon his hand caught the sun. The bows froze, not by force, by fear, because the men holding them saw something in that light, not a prophet, not a king, but the memory of the first command, bow. They dropped their weapons and fled, but the city itself, its stones, its statues, its walls began to crumble, not in rage, in relief, as if it had waited too long to be cleansed. And when the dust settled, the only thing left standing was a well. Still, quiet, ready to begin again. Solomon did not land. He did not need to. His throne passed above Zabir and moved on, a silent wave in a sky that remembered every oath. The Jinn whispered, "This is not punishment, this is return." In the north there was a city of cold stone, Cameron, ruled by silence, veiled in ice, forgotten by most. The people there had long abandoned the fire of worship. They built tall towers and buried their dead in gold. They wore veils not for modesty but to forget their own faces. The throne hovered above their tallest spire and did not move. The wind stopped, the birds vanished, and a single child walked out into the frost-covered courtyard. A girl, barefoot. She looked up, saw the throne, and did not speak. She raised her hands and whispered the only word she had ever known for God. The wind descended, touched her forehead like a kiss, and passed on. Cameron did not change that day, but the girl did. And years later she would lead them back to light, because the throne had remembered her. The Jinn who carried messages between these cities did so with a reverence they had never known in their long lives. They no longer lied, they no longer tempted, they no longer twisted the wishes of men. They carried words like water across fire. Each message from Solomon bore the same form: "Peace be upon those who bow not to me but to the one who sees me." Some cities replied with gifts, some replied with war. But Solomon never retaliated with pride. He raised the seal when needed, and when the wind lifted the throne in defense, it did so not with thunder but with memory. Every gust reminded the oppressors of what they had forgotten, that to rise without humility is to fall without mercy. In the years that followed, poets spoke of the throne that flew without wings. Mystics wrote of a king who could command jinn but chose to listen to ants. Children dreamed of a sky that whispered verses instead of storms. And in the hidden world, the jinn watched. They saw how their own kind had changed, how those who once tormented now served, how those who once rebelled now prayed before their tasks, and all of it because of the seal, because of the man who wore it like a burden, not a badge. Solomon never kept a map. He let the wind choose his path. He would say, "The earth knows where it hurts, let me go there." And the throne obeyed, because obedience once given to truth is no longer servitude, it is remembrance. The wind had carried him far, over deserts that bled dust from the bones of forgotten kings, over rivers that remembered the footsteps of prophets, over gardens that bloomed only for prayer. But even the wind has limits. There is a place above the sky, not in distance but in intention, where sound does not travel and light does not move. A place not meant for the eyes of the living nor the ambitions of the powerful. It is not a border of height. It is a border of humility. And one morning, as Solomon's throne floated above the highest peak, brushing clouds that had never known touch, the air around him began to grow thin. Not in breath, in response. The jinn grew uneasy. The birds that often flew beside him turned back. Even the ring upon his hand dimmed, not with warning but with remembrance. Solomon felt it. The air was not resisting, it was protecting, and he understood. He raised his hand and the wind stilled. The throne hovered. No higher, no further. Before him stretched the endless veil, the silence that separates knowing from unknowing, reach from surrender. He closed his eyes and felt the hush. Not absence, presence, not rejection, invitation to stay below, because even a prophet cannot pass where prostration ends and the divine alone begins. He stood from the throne, his feet still floating above the earth, and whispered, "Ya Allah, I know my place." At that moment the silence answered, not in words, not in sound, but in awe. The sky pulsed. The throne gently onward, not as a fall, as a return. When he landed, the jinn came. They had watched from afar, anxious and quiet. One stepped forward and asked, "Why did you not go further?" Solomon looked toward the heavens and replied, "Because going further would not have brought me closer." The jinn bowed, for they understood. They who had once tried to rise beyond the bounds of command now saw the beauty of restraint, the wisdom of limits, the holiness of staying where you are meant to be. From that day Solomon never rose higher than the clouds. The throne flew still but lower. The winds carried him gently but not boldly, and every journey became a lesson. He taught, "The sky is not yours to conquer, the stars are not yours to name, it is enough to serve beneath them." He told stories of Iblis, the one who rose too far and refused to kneel. He reminded the jinn, even fire must know where to stop burning. One night beneath a sky full of stars, he sat alone upon the throne, grounded now, resting beneath a fig tree. The wind was still, the seal was quiet, and he prayed, "Do not let me seek what you have hidden. Let my soul be content with what you have shown." A breeze passed across his face, soft, forgiving, and in it he felt an answer. Years later his son would ask, "Father, why did the throne not rise higher?" And Solomon replied, "Because the throne remembered what men forget, that even kings must bow when the sky grows quiet." The jinn carved a verse into stone after that day, a verse no man could read. It shimmered only in moonlight, and it said, "There is a silence above all commands. It is not empty, it is holy." Solomon never reached for the silence again, because he had touched it once, and it had taught him more than 1,000 thrones ever could. He was older than most. Not in body, for jinn do not wear age the way men do, but in the heaviness of his silence. They called him Nakir. It was not the name he was born with. It was the name he chose after forgetting what light had once touched him. He lived beneath a broken well, sealed by stones and verses no longer recited. For centuries he had slept in that shadow, stirring only when anger moved through the land above, when kings fell, when sorcerers summoned, when blood cried out from the ground. He did not answer, he only listened, to pain, to vengeance, to promises wrapped in fire. When the seal returned to the world, Nakir felt it, not with joy, with dread. For the ring burned across the unseen like sunrise against closed eyes, exposing things long buried, unchaining names long hidden. And his name had once been beautiful, but he had buried it beneath hatred. He had taken it from his own tongue so no one could summon him again. The jinn whispered of Solomon, of how he did not enslave but remembered, of how he offered obedience not as punishment but as return. Many rejoiced, but Nakir only turned deeper into the stone, curling himself around his bitterness like a second skin. He did not want to be freed. He did not want to be named, because freedom would require remorse. And he had worn his chains for so long they felt like comfort. But the seal finds all things, not to dominate, to witness. Solomon was not seeking him. He did not even know Nakir's name. But one night, as he walked through the ruins of an old village where animals had gone silent and children spoke of shadows in the well, he paused. He felt it, the heaviness, the forgotten. He placed his hand upon the stone well, and the ring grew cold, then warm, then cold again. As if uncertain whether to shine or mourn, he said nothing. He only sat beside the well and waited. Beneath, Nakir stirred. He recognized the weight above. He recognized the patience. And for the first time in 1,000 years he spoke, not aloud, within the walls. "You have come to name me." Solomon replied, not in sound but in truth, "Only if you are ready to be known." A long silence followed. Then a laugh, brittle, dry, hollow. "You do not know me, prophet. I have drowned in names. I have worn them like swords. I have etched them into flesh. I do not want yours." Solomon bowed his head. "Then I will sit with your silence." And he did. 3 days he prayed. He recited verses to the well. He asked not for obedience, only for remembrance. The villagers watched, confused. The animals returned. And on the 4th night Nakir rose. He did not come in flame. He did not roar. He emerged like smoke that had forgotten how to burn. His eyes were hollow. His voice was low. He stood before Solomon and said, "Why do you not bind me?" And Solomon replied, "Because chains cannot guide, only memory can." Nakir sneered, "I do not want memory, I want to forget." "Then you must remember what you are trying to forget." "I remember too much, that's why I stay chained." Solomon stood. He raised the ring. The seal shimmered, and the name came, not a word, a light. It wrapped itself around Nakir, not as fire, not as rope, but as a question. "Will you return?" Nakir fell to his knees. The name pulsed, but he said nothing, and silence answered for him. The light dimmed, the name faded, and the seal cooled. He had refused, not in defiance, in despair. Solomon lowered his hand and said only, "Then I will leave the chain, not as a shackle, as a key, should you ever choose to open it." Nakir looked up, tears of smoke tracing his hollow cheeks, and asked, "Will it still glow for me if I change?" Solomon placed the ring upon the earth between them. "It is not the ring that glows, it is the turning." Nakir vanished back into the cracks, but the curse upon that land lifted, and somewhere beneath stone a chain loosened just slightly, not broken, not gone, but waiting. And the jinn learned that day that the seal does not force, that not all will return, and that the deepest chains are not made of flame but of forgetting you can still be forgiven. The earth remembered him, even when he refused to remember himself. Wherever Nakir had wandered, the ground grew heavy. Not cursed, no. His defiance was not wickedness, it was sorrow turned inward. And the earth, older than jinn or kings, has always known how to weep with those who do not speak. After that final meeting beneath the cracked well, Solomon did not return. He did not send jinn to bind Nakir, nor angels to chain him. He simply walked the land in silence, but the sorrow clung to him. It was not the sorrow of failure. It was the sorrow of not being received, of offering a door and watching a soul sit beside it in chains with the key in his hand and the will too tired to turn. Solomon wept that night, not for himself, for Nakir, for all who still wore their exile as skin. The seal had recorded Nakir's name, not in light, not in stone, in ash. A faint etching upon the edge of the ring, visible only when the wind passed over it. It did not glow. It did not burn. It whispered. A name waiting to be remembered. A chain waiting to be loosed. And Solomon knew that even this was part of obedience, that even the rejected ones must be carried. He went to the jinn who had helped build the temple, the ones who had once raised pillars of flame and now carved stone in reverence. To them he said, "Write it." They bowed their heads. They did not ask whose name. They already knew. For Nakir was known among them, not feared, not hated, but grieved. He had once flown among the earliest winds, had once memorized verses before men knew fire, had once bowed beside the angels in that sacred moment of first breath before something turned inside him. They carved it upon a stone, not in public view, not in warning, in memory. The stone was black from the mountains of the east where ash sleeps beneath quiet volcanoes. The letters were fire-scribed but not burning, and the verse read, "He who is not forgotten, even when he forgets himself. May the seal of mercy find him again." They placed it in the temple's innermost garden, hidden among vines and flowing water, a place where the wind moved slow, where regret could rest. Years passed. The name faded from the tongues of men, but not from the seal. Each time Solomon prayed, he felt it warm at the edge, a soft pulse like a heartbeat just out of reach. He never spoke it aloud, but every night he whispered, "Ya Allah, if he ever turns, let him find me." One night, as the moon poured silver upon the temple's edge, a small jinn, young, quiet, a scribe among scribes, entered the garden. Did not know the story. He only followed the sound of water, and there he found the stone. He read the verse. He touched the ash-etched name, and something in his heart moved. He returned to his scrolls that night and wrote a prayer beside the name. "For the one who could not rise, let my wings carry what his heart could not." That prayer was not forgotten, not by heaven, not by wind. And in the shadowed place where Nakir lingered, deeper now, quieter, more still than stone, he felt it, not as fire, not as shame, as invitation. His chains grew lighter, not gone, but less cruel. And though he did not rise, he turned his face to the sky just once, and that was enough for the seal to warm again. Solomon felt it in his sleep. He smiled and whispered, "Ash remembers." The next day he added a second line to the garden stone. He carved it with his own hand, not with power, with prayer. "One day all chains will break, even the ones we choose." And the wind carried that verse across the jinn realm, not as command, as hope. From then on, whenever a jinn faltered, whenever one feared they had gone too far to return, they were sent to the garden, not to read history, but to remember that even ash holds the shape of fire, that even a forgotten name remains written on the seal, not to punish, but to wait. Solomon never saw Nakir again, but the prophet did not need to, because he understood what many forget, that some acts of mercy bloom after we are gone, that some prayers live longer than our breath, and that the seal does not erase those who walk away. It simply remembers where they stopped, so they can find the way back when they are ready. It was not part of the palace, nor of the temple. It had no guards, no walls, no golden gate. Yet it was the most sacred place in all Solomon's realm, a garden, small, unfinished, hidden. A place that no map marked, that no decree protected because it did not need protection. It was guarded by something stronger than soldiers, memory. The jinn called it Radha as-Sur, the garden of the secret, because no one entered it unless they had once carried a shadow. It was not for the righteous. It was not for the mighty. It was not for the ones whose obedience came easily. It was for the broken, the scorched, the ones who had once fled the seal and now came back with trembling steps and faces hidden in their wings. Solomon never ruled in that place. He did not enter it like a king. He entered barefoot, often alone, often with tears, because this was where the mercy of God had left footprints. The first jinn to kneel, there was one whose fire had once split mountains. She came with blackened wings and eyes that had not wept since the age of Adam. She did not speak. She only touched the soil, and it shimmered, as if it had been waiting for her sorrow. Solomon placed a seed in her hand and said, "Plant it, not for you, for the one you once harmed." She dug, she buried it, she wept as the soil closed over her fire, and when she left, something small had begun to grow, something that had no name yet remembered hers. The next jinn came crawling. He had no legs left, he had burned them away fleeing from truth. He dragged his body through the temple courts. None stopped him, because the seal had begun to glow. And when he reached the garden, he did not ask for healing. He only whispered, "Do you still see me?" Solomon placed a prayer upon his shoulder. "You were never unseen, you only closed your eyes." The jinn died that night, but the vine he planted grew around the trunk of an ancient fig, and every leaf bore the shape of a tear. Time passed, and the garden filled with names, not etched, not carved, grown, each flower a prayer, each root a memory, each petal a page from the book of return. Jinn came by night, always by night. They came to bury ashes, to return curses, to sing verses they had once tried to forget. Some brought dust from cities they had helped destroy. Some brought feathers fallen from angels they had once defied. And the soil received it all, without judgment, because Solomon had prayed upon it once. Let this ground remember what we forget, that no one is beyond return. The seal glowed brighter in the garden than anywhere else. Not with wrath, with recognition, as if the ring knew that here in this place even rebellion had become an offering, even failure a seed. One day a jinn came who had never spoken. She had no mouth. It had been sealed by her own vow never to speak again after cursing the name of a prophet. She carried only a broken bowl, once used in rituals of darkness. She laid it down and pointed to the ground. Solomon understood. He dug the hole for her. She poured her silence into it. And when she placed her forehead upon the soil, the ground itself wept. A single red blossom bloomed the next morning, and the seal etched a symbol into Solomon's ring, a symbol that no one could read, not even him, because some names are too sacred to say out loud. The garden grew not in size, but in weight. Every leaf bore witness. Every branch stretched like hands toward the sky. Even the birds that landed there sang softer, as if afraid to interrupt what was being remembered. The jinn called it a place of tawbah, repentance, but Solomon called it a place of dhikr, remembrance, because to return is not just to regret, it is to remember who you were before you fell, and who still waited for you after. The last time Solomon entered the garden, he carried no seed, only the ring. He placed it upon a stone in the center. He did not speak, he only listened, and the garden whispered back. The leaves rustled not with wind, but with names, hundreds, thousands. Names once feared, now planted, now remembered, now forgiven. And when he picked the ring up again, the seal pulsed, not as command, as joy, because the garden had done what thrones could not. It had made obedience beautiful again. It was a morning like any other. The wind moved gently through the olive trees. The birds sang without fear. The jinn began their work beneath the temple, shaping stone, moving water, polishing what time could not tarnish. And above them Solomon stood, not with sword, not with crown, but with staff in hand, and the ring still wrapped around his finger, glowing faintly, as it always did when truth was near. They say his eyes were open that day, not to the sky, nor to the people, to the beyond, to the place where prophets go when the body still breathes, but the soul begins to lean toward its maker. He stood at the edge of the prayer hall, facing the garden of remembrance, watching, silent, unmoving, and no one knew that death had already touched his shoulder. There were no signs, no cries, no thunder. Death came the way Solomon had lived, in obedience, without interruption, without pride. The jinn worked for hours beneath his feet, lifting stones, shaping gates, tending to the lines of sacred inscription that wound through the temple's hidden corridors. They glanced up often, saw him there, still, serene, assumed he was in deep prayer, and in a way he was, but not with words, with release. It is said that when death was sent to him, it asked no permission, and Solomon in turn offered no resistance. He had made peace with his end long before. For what is the end to one who walked daily between the seen and unseen, to one who commanded jinn with a ring but bowed before the unseen with every breath? He welcomed death not as an enemy, but as a return. He did not fall, he did not collapse. He remained standing, leaning slightly upon his staff, head bowed, like a servant who waits for the master's final word. And time passed, a day, then two. The jinn worked unaware, for the seal still glowed faintly. The air still hummed with its remembrance, and who would believe that a prophet could die without the earth groaning in response? But the earth was silent, out of respect. On the third night a worm came, small, invisible to all but the stars. It crept from the base of the staff, and began to eat, not with violence, with patience, and slowly the wood hollowed. At sunrise on the fourth day the staff cracked, not with thunder, with a soft, breaking sigh like old wood surrendering to time. And Solomon fell forward, not into pain, into peace. His body touched the stone and the ring slipped gently from his hand. The sound of it touching the floor was so soft the wind had to stop to hear it, but the jinn heard and the earth heard, and every creature beneath the temple stopped, because in that moment they knew. They rushed to him, fire dimmed, wings folded, the great ones wept, not with despair, with awe. For Solomon, the one who commanded jinn, ruled men, moved the wind and held the seal, had left them in silence. Without warning, without spectacle, only a final lesson that even in death he obeyed. The jinn trembled because they realized they had worked for days in the presence of a dead man, not knowing, not sensing, because the seal had willed it so that they might learn he did not need to command us. We were meant to obey whether he watched or not. Solomon had taught them. Even after breath, even in stillness, even with no words, they buried him beneath the garden. No gold, no statue, no tower, only prayer. And beside him they placed the staff, broken, hollow, gentle in death. And the ring, they placed it atop a stone near his heart. And no one touched it because they knew it would choose again, when the world was ready. That night the stars shone brighter, not in grief, in recognition. That one of the righteous had returned home, not as a king, not as a master, but as a servant who never forgot where to kneel. And the seal, now resting in silence, still glowed, not with fire, with waiting. He had never spoken, not since the fire in his chest first dimmed, not since the angels turned their faces away. His voice had been taken, or perhaps offered, in some ancient pact long forgotten by men, sealed before the winds had names. They called him Ramel, though no tongue had ever heard him say it. He was not among the rebellious. He had not joined Iblis in pride, nor had he warred against the prophets. He had simply disappeared, folded into silence. A shadow with wings drifting across forgotten cities, watching others rise, fall, return. He stayed at the edge of things. He watched the temple from afar. He never crossed its threshold until Solomon died. He did not rush like the others. He did not cry aloud. Moved slowly, as if walking through a dream he had feared would one day come. The news had spread like fire through the jinn realms. The prophet is gone. But Ramel did not mourn as the others did. He had mourned Solomon his whole life. For in Solomon he saw the kind of obedience he had once wanted but never believed he could carry. And now that light had returned to the giver. And he had never told him, never spoken, never bowed before him, never wept where it could be seen. But now he came. They saw him approach the garden, the jinn who had labored beside Solomon, the ones who once trembled at Ramel's silence, unsure if he was an enemy or a grief too deep to name. No one stopped him. They parted, and Ramel entered the garden alone. He walked barefoot, his wings tucked low, dragging like ash behind him. He knelt beside the grave. The stone was still warm not with life but with presence. The ring sat upon it like a watchful eye, and Ramel lowered his forehead to the soil, not in worship, in sorrow. Then something happened, something no one expected. He opened his mouth, and breath came, not fire, not wind, but voice, cracked, crooked, ancient, but real. He said only this: "I thought I had to speak perfectly to be received." The garden stirred, the trees trembled, the ground hummed with light, and from the ring a glow rose, soft and golden. As if it had waited for that sentence, as if those words were not meant for Solomon, but for himself. Ramel lifted his face. Tears of smoke traced down his cheeks. He looked at the stone and whispered again, "Forgive me for watching from the edge." And the wind answered, not with words, with invitation. No angel descended, no voice thundered. Only stillness, and a breeze, a single breeze that passed across his face and carried away what he no longer needed. The silence he had worn like a cloak. Ramel wept, not because he was broken, but because he was becoming whole. The seal pulsed, and for the first time its light touched him, not to burn, to welcome. The next day the jinn found a vine growing at the foot of Solomon's grave, twisted, black at first, then green, then silver. It bore no fruit, only leaves shaped like tongues. And when the wind passed through them, it sounded like a voice returning home. They called it, listen, Al Ramel, the tongue of Ramel, and all Jinn knew that even silence can find its voice, that even those who dwell at the edge may still be received. From that day forward, Ramal stayed in the garden. He spoke rarely, but when he did, the trees seemed to listen. He told the young Jinn, "The seal does not wait for perfection, it waits for turning." And when one asked why he had never come before, he smiled. "Because I thought I had to arrive clean, but the garden was made for dust." The ring remained atop the stone, but now when the wind blew through the garden, it often circled Ramal before it passed on, as if to say, "You are no longer at the edge." He no longer feared his voice. He no longer feared remembrance. And when he prayed, he always ended with the same words, "Let me be remembered not for what I was, but for the moment I returned." And the seal remembered, as it always had, as it always will. They came before dawn, not with trumpets nor with declarations of sorrow, but with bare feet and heads bowed low, as was the way of those who understood that silence itself is a kind of worship. Solomon had been gone 7 nights. 7 nights without command, without light, without the sacred rhythm that once shaped the days of angels and jinn alike. 7 nights since the seal had ceased to shine. It had not dimmed, it had rested, like a heart pausing between 2 great beats. The ring lay atop his stone like a question no one dared answer. But on the 8th night the stars shifted, and the elders of the jinn gathered. They did not come to take it, they came to bury it. The garden held its breath. Even the night birds fell silent, their wings stilled on the branches. The stone was lifted, not disturbed, but honored, as if the earth itself had memorized every grain of the prophet's body. And beneath it they dug, not deep, but true. They wrapped the ring in cloth spun from shadow and light, not to hide it, to protect those who were not ready. For the seal, though silent, still remembered names. Names that echoed in the unseen world. Names that could summon winds, divide oceans, bend fire to its knees. And it was said, "Until the one who walks without pride returns, the ring shall sleep in the place where obedience was last complete." It was not a farewell, it was a covenant. They buried the ring with 7 layers of earth, each mixed with something sacred. The dust of a ruined temple, the tear of a mother who lost her son to war, a feather from the wing of an angel who wept over mankind, the ash of a scroll never read, the breath of a child born in silence, a stone from the cave of the sleepers, and at last Solomon's final breath, caught in a vial of clear crystal, sealed on the day he passed, still warm. When the last layer was placed, they did not mark the spot. No pillar, no sign, only a whisper, "He who is not looking will find it." And then the garden bloomed, not in flowers, in memory. Each tree bent low as if bowing to the place where kings once knelt and jinn once wept. Even the wind slowed, not to listen but to remember. And beneath the soil the ring began to hum. A song without sound, a call not for warriors nor for rulers, but for the one whose shadow fears the light and walks toward it anyway. Many centuries passed. Empires rose with fire and vanished like dew. Tongues that once spoke in the old ways were replaced. Scrolls burned, names forgotten, but the seal remained beneath the earth, waiting, not for power, not for glory, but for one who would not reach for it. It is it that those who seek the ring never find it. But those who stumble, bleeding, praying, undeserving, may feel the ground tremble softly beneath them and may hear in their chest a name they do not recognize but somehow know. And in that moment, if they kneel not to possess but to repent, the dust may part, and the ring may rise again, but only for a moment, only for a breath, only to remind the world, I am not lost, I am only waiting. In some forgotten parts of the desert, old women still press their ears to the ground before sleeping. They say they can hear it humming. And sometimes, just before dawn, a soft warmth touches the soles of their feet, like the kiss of a prophet who no longer walks but still watches. And those who wear false seals, those who speak in voices they have not earned, they do not hear it, not even in dreams. For the ring does not shine for the clever. It shines for the tired, the broken, the faithful. Some say it will rise once more in the final days. that when shadows touch the gates of every city and angels turn their faces once again toward the earth, the soil will remember the weight of the ring, and it will open its mouth, not to devour but to return. Until then, it sleeps beneath 7 layers of remembrance, and those who walk past it never know how close they came to the presence of something that once ruled spirits and storms. But sometimes, just sometimes, a child dreaming in the dust will open their hand and find a warmth there. No jewel, no gold, just warmth, and they will smile in their sleep. And the garden, wherever it now lies, will sing to itself beneath the stars, not of Solomon, not of kings, but of obedience, of dust, of the one ring that never truly left. Then walk with soft feet, beloved, for there are places where even jinn lower their voices and winds speak in tongues older than fire. You may not see them, but they walk among ruins. Not like shadows and not like ghosts. They move like questions waiting for the right silence. They are the spirits who once served the king of the seal. And though the ring has been buried and the prophet returned to the dust of obedience, they still wait. Not because they must, but because they remember. There are cities no map carries, places where the bones of temples still shudder when the moon is full. The wind speaks there, not in words, in remembrance. And there, wandering through broken stone, cracked gold, and pillars with names scraped away, walk the ones who still carry the scent of Solomon's command. Jinn who once carved rivers with their hands, spirits who once stitched wind into the sails of merchant kings, angels who were told to watch and wept when it was time to let go. In the ruins of a forgotten city, its name lost beneath the sands of Yemen, there stands a well. No rope ever returns full, no eye ever sees the bottom, but it sings, low, soft, with a voice that quivers like heat on stone. And the Bedouins say, don't lean too close, you might hear your name before you were born. They believe that's where Solomon cast the scrolls that were not for mankind, not out of cruelty, out of mercy. And the jinn assigned to guard it, they still circle it every night, not out of duty, out of love. There is a spirit called Shamlel, known to the desert tribes as the one who waits beneath sand. He once held back locust swarms from the fields of Jerusalem with a whisper. He once breathed beneath the sea to shape coral into pillars for Solomon's southern temple. He does not speak anymore. But when sandstorms rise in the empty quarter, travelers say a face appears briefly in the wind, eyes closed, lips moving in prayer. It is Shamlel, not protecting, not warning, remembering. The memory of Solomon is not carved into stone. It is carved into obedience, into the souls of those who once knelt not because they were forced, but because he reminded them what obedience could feel like. Not slavery, not fear, but a holy alignment, a return to what they were made for. Even the mountains remember. There are peaks in the Zagros Range that rumble without earthquakes. Geologists call it natural plate tension. But the old mystics say otherwise. They say those mountains once bowed when Solomon passed overhead, carried on the wind by an army of jinn. And sometimes they still sigh, not with stone, with longing. A shepherd once claimed to have met an old man made of smoke, seated beside a pool that reflected stars not of this world. The man said nothing, only pointed to the sky. When the shepherd looked up, he saw the constellation of Orion rearrange itself into the shape of a hand wearing a ring. When he looked back down, the man was gone. But the pool was warm, and a single almond tree had grown where none had ever taken root. What do these spirits want? They do not hunger, they do not sleep, they do not seek revenge or glory. They seek permission, to kneel once more, to be called upon, not to serve a man, but to remember who they were when they were seen not as monsters, but as creations. When Solomon spoke to them not with pride, but with command shaped like mercy. Even the winds carry this ache. The eastern winds, known to the elders as Rhea al-Sakina, sometimes reverse course, without cause, without storm. Sailors fear these reversals, but mystics say it is the wind trying to return to the last place it heard Solomon's voice, as if retracing the path of prophecy. A ruined arch in Samarkand is known as Bab al-Kitab, the Gate of the Book. It is said that when the moonlight passes through it on the 33rd night of a silent spring, one can hear the sound of paper turning, though no books remain. Some believe it was once a library built by the spirits, filled with the laws Solomon wrote for the jinn to follow. Others say it was a door he closed with tears, a door that led to something too heavy for mankind to carry. And then there are the watchers, the unknown spirits. Those who never served him, never approached the throne, but now stand at a distance near the borders of the world, not out of hatred, but out of shame. They watch not for his return, but for the one who might reflect him, the one whose voice may not command storms, but who listens before speaking, who kneels before ruling, who weeps before judging. Until then the ruins remain warm, even when abandoned, even when cursed, even when nameless. Because the seal that once passed over them did not pass without leaving light. And the spirits who wander there, they are not ghosts, they are memories walking. Not all who remember are lost, some are preserved, in ruins, in wind, in the heat that lingers after a prophet is gone. And if one day you should find yourself lost among ruins and the wind trembles and the stones seem to sigh beneath your feet, do not be afraid. Do not run, close your eyes, and say gently, I remember him too. You may not hear an answer, but somewhere a spirit will kneel, some angels fly. But some remain not because they were commanded, but because their wings refused to leave what love had once touched. There is a whisper passed among the windwalkers of old Jerusalem, a whisper that curls like incense through forgotten halls and lingers in places where the prayers are too heavy to speak aloud. They say an angel remained, not in the heavens, not among the stars, but in the temple, long after the last stone fell. Long after Solomon turned to dust, long after the jinn returned to the winds and the scrolls were sealed, one angel stayed. His name is not remembered in any book, not carved into any pillar, not sung in any of the psalms that still echo through sacred courtyards, but he is known by what he became, the presence that does not depart. He had stood to Solomon's right hand during the final days, never speaking, never stepping forward, but always watching. Watching the prophet speak to kings as though they were children, watching him lift no sword yet command armies, watching him kneel at night whispering prayers for the very jinn who had once clawed at the walls of heaven. And when the seal was placed into the earth and the sky wept and the command passed into silence, the angel did not ascend. He folded his wings and remained, not out of rebellion, not out of confusion, but because of longing, for the kind of obedience he had once seen made flesh, for the scent of holy justice that still lingered between the stones of the temple courtyard, for the echo of Solomon's voice when he called the wind as if calling a lost brother home. Time does not pass for angels, but the temple crumbled, stone by stone, throne by throne. One day the ceiling was no longer there. The cedar beams, once perfumed and painted with gold, turned to rot. The doors became homes for owls. The pillars cracked like tired bones, but the angel remained. He did not cry. He did not rage. He simply stood where the throne had once been and waited. Many tried to enter, conquerors, seekers, thieves. Some came for power, hoping to find relics of Solomon's dominion. Others came for wonder, to breathe the dust of prophecy, but none could stay, because the moment they crossed the threshold, they forgot why they came, and left with silence braided into their tongues. It was mercy. The angel would not let them desecrate what had once hosted the seal. It is said that when the moon is thin and the wind quiet, those who sleep near the old walls of Jerusalem sometimes wake with tears drying on their cheeks, though they do not know why. And in their dreams a single figure stands motionless in a great hall of light. No face, no name, just stillness, and a voice soft as the breath of a leaf. I remember what obedience looked like. Then they wake, and their hearts ache with a longing they cannot explain. Once a young child entered the ruins, not for power, not for prophecy. She was chasing a lamb. The animal had slipped between the stones and vanished. When she stepped into the temple ruins, the air did not change. The silence did not deepen. But the angel bowed, not in worship but in recognition, for she carried no pride, only wonder, and the lamb now resting beside the broken altar raised its head without fear. The child sat cross-legged as if at school, and the angel stood, not seen but felt, a warmth that hummed through the cracked bones of the walls. She did not speak, but when she rose to leave, she turned once more and whispered, "I'll come back. I think someone lives here." The angel did not move, but a single sunbeam slipped through the broken ceiling and touched the spot where Solomon's throne had once stood, as if nodding. It is said that the angel speaks only once each 1,000 years, and only to the earth, to remind it not to forget the shape of holiness. The soil listens, the roots listen, and for a brief moment the birds that nest in the temple ruins sing in tongues no longer known. The song is short, but it weeps. The scholars argue if it's possible. They say no angel would remain without divine command, but the mystics smile and say, some obedience is not commanded, it is chosen. And the one who commanded the angels once said, "I know what you do not know." Perhaps this is what he meant. In the final days, when mountains walk and oceans forget where they belong, it is said that angel will rise, not to fight, not to punish, but to point to the place where the ring was buried, and then he will vanish, not in light, not in thunder, but like breath leaving the lungs of someone who has waited too long, and only then will the final bearer be known. But until that hour he waits, among broken stones and dandelions, in silence that speaks louder than the stars, with wings that refuse to leave what once smelled like paradise. And if you should ever find yourself lost in the ruins of something holy and you feel watched, do not fear. It is not judgment, it is memory, and you are walking where angels mourn with reverence. Not all echoes come from the past. Some are made of names that still tremble beneath the weight of remembrance. Beneath the earth where no light has ever wandered, where even the oldest roots forget the feel of the sun, there is a place, a hollow, a depth untouched by flood or flame, where the wind does not speak and water dares not whisper. There, in a chamber sealed before the first empire was carved from clay, his name is still spoken, not by man, not by angel, but by those who still tremble at the memory of his voice. The jinn who were cast down in chains of smoke, the spirits who once rebelled but were bound in silence, the ones who remember, not because they wish to, but because they were sealed with it. They do not speak it aloud, they cannot. The seal forbade it, but it moves within them, in the way they breathe, in the way they twist in their sleep, in the way they try and fail to forget the weight of a ring that once commanded their bones to obey. His name, Sulayman. It's not thunder, it does not burn, it resonates, like a bell made of stars struck in the deepest cavern. The Quran says that Solomon was given command over the jinn, that he spoke and the winds bent, that he prayed and creatures of fire wept. But what it does not say is how the earth remembers him still, not in stories, in stone. There is a mountain in the far east older than writing. The monks call it Zubarat al-Ra, the edge of the spirit. None live on its slopes, birds avoid it. But at its base, a cavern yawns open once every 13 winters. A howl escapes it, though no beast is seen, and the howl bears no rage, only sorrow. A team of geologists once descended into its upper tunnels. They did not return, but the only message recovered from their last transmission was a single word, he, then silence. They had reached too deep, and the memory of the seal had answered. In the deepest regions of the earth, far below what man can dig, the jinn who defied the prophet still dwell. They are not free, nor are they dead. They lie like curled smoke wrapped around pillars of salt and veins of forgotten fire. Their eyes are closed, but their lips move, not in defiance, but in confession. They speak the name, and the name echoes through tunnels no star has ever seen, not in praise, not in love, but in submission remembered too late. A Sufi mystic once dreamt he fell through the 7 layers of earth. Each layer was darker than the last, each silence deeper than death. But at the very bottom he heard not screams but chanting, soft, rhythmic, the syllables ancient but unmistakable, Sulayman, 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 and he wept, not from fear, but because even in punishment the jinn had not forgotten who once reminded them of what holiness sounded like. Not all jinn hate him, some loved him too deeply. Spirits like Marzafin, who once shaped the temple gardens with whispers to the soil. She begged to remain after his death, but her grief tore the clouds. And so she was placed beneath the earth to sing to roots in the dark. She still hums. If you sit long enough by the trees of Jerusalem and close your eyes, you might hear her lullabies rise through the bark, each melody shaped with a name she cannot speak, but still remembers. In a cave beneath the ruins of Babylon, a group of boys once played. One dared to enter alone. He never returned, but the others say he left behind a strange smell of incense and ash. And carved into the stone in letters no one had taught him was a single line. He is not gone, the seal is not forgot. The seal, yes, it is hidden, buried, some say in the deepest pit where jinn are chained. Others say it was placed within the very bones of the earth, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that even stone must remember what obedience once looked like. And perhaps that is why earthquakes sometimes come without warning, why mountains cry in lands untouched by grief, why the soil of ancient lands grows wild with herbs none can tame, because the earth itself is shivering, not in fear but in remembrance. There are caves so deep that sound takes minutes to return. In one such cavern in the Horn of Africa, the tribes speak of a spirit named Huzn al-Ard, the sorrow of the earth. They say he speaks only once every 100 years, not with rage, not with prophecy, but with a name. And when he does, the rocks weep. The cave floods with water that tastes of salt and honey. And for a single night the bats sleep in peace, because the name calms even the wildest dark. Not all places are silent, some are still speaking, and some are still listening, waiting for the one who will come not with pride, not with armies, but with the scent of old obedience on his shoulders, the one who will speak not as a king, but as a servant. The jinn beneath the earth still wait, not for freedom, but for the voice that once made them feel seen. And when that voice returns, even if just a whisper in the wind, even if just the brush of sandalwood in a ruined hall, even if just the breath of a child learning the old names, they will rise, not to conquer, not to curse, but to kneel, for some names cannot be buried, even in the belly of the earth. Sulayman, the wind still carries it, the caves still murmur it. And in the dark the jinn still remember. There is a place where the mountain breathes, not in wind, not in dust, but in the memory of voices that once defied the stars. The ancients do not name it, they fear what names awaken, but the jinn remember, for it was there at the edge of heaven's light and earth's trembling soil that a circle was drawn in fire, and within it they swore, 200 stood, not men, not angels, but the watchers, the sons of flame, the fallen who had not yet fallen. Their leader stood at the center, his voice like thunder behind a veil, SHM letter 1E25 a Z a macron I. Cloaked not in arrogance but in certainty, a certainty forged not from rebellion but from the ache of desire, not for power, but for touch, for flesh, for the daughters of men, for the wombs that bore blood instead of light. Above them the stars flickered as if to listen, and below the earth recoiled. SHM letter 1E25 a Z a macron I stepped forward. His eyes were not red, not black, not molten. They were empty, not with absence but with decision. And he whispered almost gently, "We cannot return, so let us become gods." A murmur moved through the host of watchers. Not all believed, not all desired, but all had seen. They had watched too long from the heights, heard too many songs, felt too much of Eve's sorrow echo through the generations, and something inside them cracked, not in defiance but in yearning. One by one they placed their feet inside the circle, and one by one they spoke, "I swear." The ground pulsed beneath them. The ring of fire that encircled them did not burn, it remembered, it bound, and it marked the moment when the watchers became something else. Not angels, not yet demons, but chained souls drifting between light and flesh. Solomon would one day find their names, not written in books, not chiseled into rock, but whispered through the roots of mountains and the breath of crows. He would speak them aloud only once in a cave that smelled of ash and mercy, and the earth would tremble. But in that hour on the mountain when the watchers swore, the skies wept, not in rain, in absence. God turned his face, not in wrath but in silence, for what had been holy now hung in air unmoored, and it would fall, but not yet. First came the teachings, then came the giants, then came the grief. And though Shm letter 1E25 a Z a macron I led them, it was Azazel who forged the path. It was Azazel who brought iron and fire and the secrets of war. It was Azazel who broke the sacred line between heaven's restraint and earth's hunger. And it was Azazel who would one day lie beneath chains of flame, in a pit whose darkness has no end. But that night, under stars that looked away, he smiled. For the world was a boo. To change, and he had touched the boundary. No one knows who drew the circle. Some say it appeared when the first watcher whispered love into the ear of a shepherd's daughter. Others say it had always been there, a place for promises that heaven would not recognize. But all agree on this. When the last watcher stepped into the fire and spoke his vow, the mountain cracked. A fissure opened beneath the circle, and from its depths came a wind that had no scent, only memory, only consequence. The watchers left that night, not as angels, not as men, but as oath-bearers. Each carried with them a shard of the circle's heat, and wherever they walked, forests wilted, waters grew still, and the skies no longer sang above them. But some say Shm letter 1E25 a Z a macron I wept, that when the others slept beside mortal wives and dreamed of sons who would break the world, he returned to the mountain, kneeling alone in the circle now cooled to stone. He raised his face to the void above, and whispered, "Forgive me." But no voice answered, only silence, and the crack beneath him glowing faintly as if awaiting the last fall. Solomon would later speak of that mountain, though he never climbed it. He said, "There are places even Jinn will not go, because fire remembers its own." And so the watchers lived, not as demons, not yet, but as those who had once drawn a circle in fire and swore with hands that still bore heaven's scent. What is more dangerous than fire? A name spoken out of season, given to those not ready to carry its weight. The watchers came not only to take, they came to teach. That was their great heresy, not lust, not hunger, but the breaking of the barrier of knowing. For every creature has its season, and there are truths too heavy for bone. But the watchers, bound by fire, unmoored from heaven, believed they were giving gifts. So they opened their mouths and poured the heavens into the dust. Azazel was the first. He taught men how to forge iron, how to draw swords from earth's belly, how to shape fire into war. And women, he taught them the mirror, to see themselves as objects of form, not soul, to worship reflection, to bind their beauty in chains of pigment and powder. And he smiled as he taught, for he believed he was liberating them from innocence, from Eden's veil, from silence. Then came Armaros, who uncoiled the tongues of serpents. He taught enchantments, words that ripple through time, curses that linger on unborn generations. He whispered to the roots and rivers and told men how to bend nature to desire. But nature never forgets, and every spell is a debt. Even now the forests of Bashan remember his voice, and twist when the wind says his name. Barakel brought the secrets of stars. He taught astrology, how to chart destiny by flame. But what he did not say was that stars lie. They shine with memory, not intention. And to follow their light without permission is to walk into the abyss thinking it is morning. Kakibel gave men the gift of signs. He taught them the movement of celestial spheres, the signs of portents. He believed he was sharing wisdom, but he had forgotten the old law. What is sacred must remain veiled until the soul is ready, and men were not ready. They turned signs into omens, worshipped the sky, and forgot the one who had set the stars to sing. Others followed. Penemu taught the art of writing, script and ink and scroll. The alphabet was unchained, but with it came lies, false covenants, contracts soaked in greed. Words that twist like smoke and sound like truth but carry no soul. He thought he was giving memory, but he gave manipulation. And the first lie was written in ink that still stains the heart. Casteja taught the children of men about demons, how to banish them, but also how to summon them. He unlocked the gate and left it open. And from that moment, the world was never silent again. Each watcher believed he was liberating, unbinding, empowering, but they had forgotten one thing. The fruit of knowledge without the tree of submission is poison, and the poison seeped into the soil, into the bones of giants, into the breath of kings. The women who bore the watchers' children were given names too. The watchers taught them sacred syllables, meant only for angels in worship. But on their lips they became seduction, words of power whispered into the ears of gods. And the giants born from them spoke in languages that the earth itself refused to echo. These were not languages of praise. They were not words of gratitude. They were commandments formed in pride. And every time the giants spoke, the skies cracked, as if the heavens themselves tried to shut their mouths. But it was too late. The names had been taught. The knowledge had been scattered like embers into straw, and the world began to burn. There is a scroll hidden in a temple long buried beneath the sands of Yemen. It bears no script, only etchings that shimmer like light through water. When read by moonlight, it tells of a night when a shepherd in ancient Canaan heard voices rising from the trees. He followed the sound and saw 7 figures wrapped in robes of smoke. They spoke not to him but to the stars. They were naming them, commanding them. One star fell, another dimmed, the sky grew sick. The shepherd fled and was blind by morning, and all he could say from his bed was, "They taught the sky to obey." But not all were deceived. Some among the children of men wept at the teachings. They buried the names, scribbled them on clay, and smashed the clay to shards. They sang psalms to drown the voices of angels gone astray. They stood at night beneath the open sky and begged, "O Lord, take back the names." But names once spoken cannot be unsaid. They echo, they burrow, they live. And so the watchers watched once more, but now not from the heights of heaven, from the shadows of their own grief. They saw men raise idols in the shapes of stars, saw women trade truth for charms, saw blood spilt in rituals once meant for praise, and they remembered Eden, and what they were before they taught, and many wept. But Azazel did not. He stood on the mountain and whispered, "We did what heaven would not, we freed them." But freedom without purpose is a cage made of glass, and the shards still cut. Solomon would later find fragments of their knowledge. He did not teach it, he bound it. He hid the names beneath walls of wind, sealed them under slabs of stone, and spoke only this: knowledge is mercy when guarded, a weapon when sold. Still the names remain, buried in ruins, sung by those who do not understand their weight, painted in symbols on walls in ink that smells of copper and fear, waiting, breathing like coals under dust. Beneath the mountains where no wind breathes they sleep, not in rest, but in judgment. Their names are not spoken aloud in the heavens. Their faces are not remembered by angels. They have no tombs, for their chains are their grave. And the fire that binds them does not flicker. It watches, it waits, it knows. Azazel lies in Dudal, a wasteland where nothing lives. The winds scream but carry no sound, a pit carved by command, not by time. There he is buried face down beneath the stones of silence. Above him, sharp rocks. Beneath him, flame. Around him, 7 angels of wrath who do not sleep. They do not speak. They do not blink. They do not forgive. The others, the watchers who swore with him, are scattered. Some beneath rivers long dried. Some beneath cities built by their children. Others beneath deserts that once burned with their footprints. They lie not dead but undying, waiting, not by choice but by prophecy. Enoch saw the day, in vision, in trembling, in shadowed breath. He stood upon the edge of Dudal. He saw Azazel beneath chains of fire that did not burn his flesh but scorched his spirit. He saw the watchers beneath the mountains groan, not in pain but in memory, and he wept, because he knew they would rise again, not to repent but to finish what they began. There is a time appointed when the firmament will groan, when the earth will spit out what it once swallowed, when the chains will crack not by rust but by permission, and the watchers will open their eyes, one by one, with no light to blind them, no sky to restrain them, no heaven to call them back. The Book of Jubilees whispers it. The Quran veils it in signs. The Psalms weep beneath it. The last day, the day of rising. The day when old pacts are remembered, not broken. The day the Watchers' oaths echo once more through creation. And on that day the Watchers will not return as teachers, not as kings, not even as rebels. They will return as reminders of what happens when angels touch what was never theirs, when desire speaks louder than obedience, when knowledge is used not to praise but to possess. Some say they will walk again among men, tall as towers, eyes like cracked heavens, voices like thunder weeping. Their sons long dead will not return, but the memory of their children's violence will ride before them, and the world will tremble. Others say the Watchers will not walk at all, that they will rise only to stand in judgment, that they will be unchained for one purpose, to kneel, to see what they tried to become, to face the throne they once turned from, and to fall, not again, but finally. There is a hidden hadith known only to a few that speaks of a time near the end, when a man will wander into a cave sealed by iron and prayer, and he will hear weeping, not of sorrow, of memory. He will not understand the words, but the earth around him will shake, and a voice will say, "Do not open what God has shut." But curiosity is the first sin after pride, and pride always returns. It is not just men who wait. The Jinn remember the Watchers. Some revere them, others fear them. A few serve them still, in shadows, in smoke, in songs whispered to children who do not know why they cry at night. And they too wait for the signs for the day. What signs? The rivers that will reverse, the stars that will dim, the wombs that will close, the skies that will not answer, and a voice heard in the bones of mountains. Release them. And yet some say the Watchers weep even now, that Azazel mourns not his punishment but the weight of what he began, that Sham letter 1E25 a Z a Macron I praise still from beneath the rocks that crushed his wings, that others beg for a second Eden, not to take, but to kneel, to be made pure again. But mercy is not promised to those who taught rebellion in heaven's name. The day they are unchained is not a gift, it is a reckoning, a remembering. Return not to glory but to judgment. And the chains, they are not made of metal, they are made of time, truth, God's silence. And when they break, the sky will weep fire, and the earth will scream like a mother who has lost her child. Solomon once asked if the Watchers would ever be freed. The wind replied, only when man no longer needs warning. But man forgets and the Watchers remember, and the fire has not gone out, only hidden. So listen now. The chains are still there, but they are straining. They hear the wars, the corruption, the towers built to mimic heaven. They smell the pride, and they tighten for a little while. But when the last seal is opened, when the last name is spoken, when the last veil is torn, they will rise, and all that was once whispered beneath stars will be shouted beneath thunder, and you will know their names again, but this time you will not speak them back. There was a time when the sky was not just a veil above us. It was alive, it breathed, it sang, it remembered. It remembered the days when angels danced like fire across its back, when every star was a word of the divine, and the moon bore witness to covenants no tongue now dares to utter. The night was not empty then. It was thick with remembrance, with prophecy, with promise, and above them all the wind still carried the name of one man, Sulayman, the king who ruled not with pride but with prayer, the prophet whose silence could still the legions of spirits beneath the earth, whose ring now gone had once been kissed by winds, touched by flame, and bowed to by creatures of realms unseen. But now the sky was dim, and it grieved, for it knew something that the world below did not, that heaven's silence was not absence, it was warning. And the stars, oh, the stars, they were beginning to blink one by one, not with life but with farewell. Beneath that fading sky the prophet stirred from his sleep. The desert around him had grown still, not just still as in quiet. still as in hell breath ancient still. Like the moment before God says a word that will change the world again. The animals were restless, even those of the unseen kind. The jinn who once spun gold into thread with their breath and laid stone upon stone in his name, they now watched from the shadows, quiet and afraid. For the prophet had seen something in his dream. He had seen the stars tremble. He had seen a throne begin to weep. And he had felt it, a slow unraveling. The sacred thread that bound heaven, earth, wind, fire, spirit, and soul was fraying. But Solomon did not speak of it. Instead he stood, wrapped his robe of dusk around him, and walked toward the great columns of the unfinished temple, the last the jinn would ever build, though they did not know it yet. His steps were slow now. Not weak, no, never weak, but heavy, like a mountain shifting its weight. Like one who knows that every moment is a page in a story nearing its final word. The jinn bowed as he passed. Even the most rebellious among them kept their eyes down, for in his presence something older than law breathed the memory of when they too stood in heaven and chose to fall. But Solomon did not meet their eyes. He looked up to the sky, to the stars, to the light that once danced across his brow like a second crown, and he whispered not to them but to the one who had given him the ring, the one who had taken it back, the one who never left. And as he stood beneath the sky that had once sung with joy at his every word, he wept, not from sorrow, from knowing that even he, the prophet, the king, the seer of spirits and commander of winds, even he would one day return to dust, and that when he did, the silence would stretch so wide, so long, that even the stars would forget how to shine. But there is a grace in such knowing. For those who remember their end walk more gently through the world. They bless with fewer words. They wound with greater care. They become vessels of mercy in a time of wrath. And Solomon, peace upon him, was that vessel. Even as the temple rose behind him, stone by stone, laid by hands that once cursed heaven, his eyes remained fixed above, waiting for the silence to break, but it did not. And that too was sacred. He did not fall like other men. There was no cry, no fina. El gasp, no reaching hand in the dark. He simply stood, wrapped in a woolen robe, his ring glinting faintly like the last ember of a dying star. Sulayman placed his hand upon the staff carved by jinn fire and heaven's breath, a gift from the unseen. And there beneath the arch of a half-built ceiling, as the shadows of spirits twalled in silence, he stood still. So still that even the breeze hesitated. No one knew, not the jinn who chiseled the stone in fear of his commands. Not the winds that swirled gently around his feet, waiting for a whisper. Not the birds that paused mid-flight to catch his eye. Not even the earth beneath him, which had once split at his command, now held her breath. For death, when it came to Sulayman, did not shout. It bowed. It cloaked itself in reverence. It stepped lightly as if intruding on prayer. It stood behind him like a servant and waited. And when the time was right, it placed its hand on his shoulder. But still he did not fall. He remained standing, his back straight, his eyes lifted toward heaven as if still listening, still ruling, still praying. And so the jinn labored, day after day. They built and carved and carried and obeyed, terrified of his command, careful not to look into his eyes, for in his presence they still felt the weight of God's wrath. But the prophet was gone, and only God knew it. This moment was not the end of a man. It was a divine secret, a sign, a lesson, a mirror held to the unseen. For who can say they are truly powerful if they only obey while being watched? The jinn, who had once thought themselves free of consequence, now worked with trembling hands, and in doing so the heavens recorded their shame, not because they labored, but because they only feared the staff, not the one who gave it. That staff, that sacred root of unseen origin, held him now. It bore his weight like a final servant, and though the spirit had departed the flesh, the body stood tall, noble, dignified. A seal upon the age. Time passed, and none saw the truth, until the unseen began to whisper. A worm, a soft, sacred creature made not of rebellion but hunger, crept beneath the wood. It gnawed, not out of disobedience, but because it was told to. It was not a curse, it was revelation. A creature too small to command, too lowly to fear, was chosen to be the end, the reminder, the veil lifter. And so it chewed, not with hatred, not with fire, but with faith. And each bite echoed across the realms, until, crack, the staff split, and with it the body of the prophet leaned forward, not like one defeated, but like a door opened slowly, like a curtain lifted in a room of breathless watchers. He fell, but not in shame, not in grief, not in weakness. He fell as prophets do, surrounded by silence, wrapped in divine light and known only by the one who sent them. And the jinn, they froze, their tools dropped, their wings faltered, their hearts, if jinn have such things, trembled, for they saw then the truth. He had been dead all this time, and they had been watched not by his eyes but by God's. And the shame that fell upon them was heavier than any curse, heavier than fire, heavier than chains. For now they knew obedience born of fear is not obedience at all. The heavens recorded it. The winds carried the story. And somewhere in the shadowed corners of time, the angels wept with awe. The man who ruled spirits, the man who commanded winds, the man who built with jinn and walked with beasts, chose to fall standing. And in doing so he taught them all. That dignity lies not in how one commands, but in how one returns. The wind no longer obeyed him. The jinn no longer knelt. The staff was shattered, and the seal was silent. It lay beside his still hand now, that ancient ring. Once it had glowed with light that danced like stars caught in amber. Once it had trembled with divine purpose. Once it had echoed with the names of God whispered in languages no tongue had known since the first breath of time. Now it was quiet. There are some things too sacred to be passed on. And the ring of Sulayman, peace be upon him, was never meant to live beyond him. The jinn did not dare touch it, not out of reverence, but out of terror. For they knew it had not been the ring that ruled them, but the hand that wore it in obedience to the One. And now that hand had returned to dust. The earth itself sighed, and it began to open, not with violence, not with storm, but with a tenderness only known to those who have buried prophets. A grave that had waited since the creation of Adam now uncurled its arms, and with it the body of Sulayman was taken into the earth. Wrapped not in silk, but in the dignity of silence. The ring was the last to go. It did not shine, it did not speak, it did not resist. It simply slid from his finger and kissed the soil. There are no tombs grand enough for the truly faithful, so the earth does what stone cannot, it remembers in silence. Years would pass, centuries, ages wrapped in smoke and time, and still men would search for the ring. They would tear through cities and burn forests. They would bribe demons and slaughter innocents. They would whisper dark names in caves and invoke the jinn of ancient bloodlines, all for the promise of that power, the seal, the control, the mastery. But they did not know the ring was not power, it was submission. It did not rule by magic, it ruled by permission. And the one who had given it had taken it back. Some say it dissolved into the soil, its stones crumbled, its gold eaten by roots, its light folded into the heartbeat of the earth. Others say it waits, hidden in a place no hand can reach, until one like him returns. But the truth, it never belonged to this world. It was a mercy, a trust, a test. And when the one who bore it passed, it was returned to the only one who could bear it. Still, the stories never stopped. Children of kings grew into tyrants, dreaming of the ring. Sorcerers carved their bones with symbols, hoping to awaken its spirit. Jinn whispered lies into men's ears, saying they had seen it glint in hidden places. And dreamers, tired of injustice, wept beneath the stars, praying that the ring might return, that a righteous king would rise and silence the devils again. But the silence held, and the stars refused to shine. For some stories are not meant to repeat. Some seals are never forged twice. Some prophets leave no heir but memory. Sulayman was not a man of gold, nor a king of palaces. He was a servant, a bearer of divine trust, a listener in the wind. And the ring did not give him power, it reminded him of who truly held it. So if you hear the wind call your name in the silence of night, or feel the earth stir with something ancient beneath your feet, do not seek the ring. Seek what he sought, the voice, the silence, the breath of God between the trees. For that is where the true seal lies, not on a finger, but in a heart that bends before the One, even when the stars do not shine. And if the ring has returned to dust, let it be. For perhaps that was the last mercy we were given. And if the fire never returned, would you still kneel in the ashes? If the seal was never found again, would your soul still submit? And if the stars never shine again, will you remember the light that once lived in a man who ruled only because he obeyed? So now the ring is gone, buried beneath centuries of dust and silence, not in a palace, not in a temple, but in the hush where obedience becomes its own throne. You have listened long, dear soul, not just with ears, but with something deeper, that quiet place within you that remembers what heaven felt like before it was veiled. The ring of Sulayman was never just a story of power. It was a secret, a surrender. A lesson written not in ink, but in the way Jinn trembled before the breath of a man who obeyed. And now that secret sleeps again, not to be uncovered by hands, but by hearts. Perhaps it is not meant to return. Perhaps it already has, in the silence between your own prayers, in the way you resist the darkness, even when no one sees. Do you not feel it? The ring never left the earth. Its memory lives in the ones who still fear the unseen, who still whisper God's names when no one is watching, who still believe that one just soul can silence legions of demons. So if the stars never shine again, light a lamp within your chest. And if the jinn rise again, answer with stillness, not fear. For the seal was never made of stone. It was carved into the breath of a man who walked with angels and ruled by bowing his head. And now that you have heard his story, what will you do in the silence? Will you wait for the ring, or will you become the hand worthy to wear it? And if the last word God spoke was silence, would you still listen? Would you still kneel? Would you still believe?